A single mother falls asleep on the subway, exhausted from a long day. Unknowingly, she's sitting next to a millionaire. When she wakes up, something unbelievable happens. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Melissa Roberts adjusted the collar of her well-worn coat, trying to shield herself from the biting October wind as she stepped onto East 14th Street in Manhattan. It was nearly midnight, and the city lights reflected off puddles from a recent rain. She clutched her thin handbag close, its contents more precious to her than anything else she owned, a few crumpled dollar bills, the keys to a modest apartment in Brooklyn, and an eviction notice she had yet to face. Night after night, she juggled shifts at two different restaurants, Garden's Diner and Brown's Brunch Bar, never quite making enough to feel safe. She was 36 but felt older than her years. The lines under her eyes marked 1,000 worries, and she anxiously checked her phone to see if the babysitter, Rebecca, had sent any messages. 7-year-old Ivy was at home under Rebecca's care, fast asleep by now, if Melissa was lucky. The thought of her daughter waiting in a cramped apartment weighed on her. Ivy deserved better. Melissa often stayed awake, haunted by the fear that she was failing her only child. The subway entrance yawned ahead, and Melissa hurried down the steps. Her legs ached from a double shift, filled with endless coffee refills and plates of greasy eggs. But she pressed forward, scanning her Metro card and descending further into the humming station. The L train approached with a rush of air, its fluorescent-lit cars inviting her into the warmth. Once inside, she settled into a seat near the door, sighing in relief as she slipped off her coat. She glanced at her phone. No new messages from Rebecca. That was either good news or a sign the babysitter was too polite to keep pestering for her overdue payment. Melissa's cheeks burned at the memory of their last conversation, when she had to promise once again that she'd pay soon. She hated the feeling of owing people money, but every day brought a new stack of bills. Looking around, she noticed a man in a tailored suit seated to her left, quietly reading something on his phone. He had an air of calm about him, distinctly different from the usual late-night riders. Most passengers at this hour were dozing off or listening to music through oversized headphones. He, on the other hand, sat upright, eyes flicking across his screen with studied concentration. Melissa wondered fleetingly what his story could be, maybe a lawyer or an executive who worked late. Still, she was too tired to keep guessing. She leaned back, willing her mind to focus on Ivy. The child's bright smile was the one beacon of hope in her life. Melissa recalled how her daughter would wait by their tiny window, excited just to see her mother come home. That pure devotion kept Melissa going through double shifts and mounting debts. It was for Ivy that Melissa put on a brave face each morning. The train lurched forward, rocking gently. Melissa closed her eyes, determined to stay awake at least until her stop in Brooklyn. Tomorrow would be another grueling round of serving tables, hustling for tips. She tried to imagine a life where she worked one stable job that paid enough, where she could tuck Ivy in without rushing back out the door. Maybe, one day, she'd find a position in some office, handling logistics or working in administration. Something with more predictable hours, less strain on her back. She wasn't sure how to get there, but the dream lingered at the edge of her thoughts. Her phone buzzed. She jolted and saw a text from Rebecca. "Everything's okay. Ivy is asleep." Melissa exhaled, relieved. She replied with a quick thank you and a promise that she'd be home soon. But as soon as she put her phone away, her exhaustion hit like a wave. The stale warmth of the train made it impossible to fight the heaviness in her eyelids. Without warning, her head dipped to the side. She tried to straighten, but each attempt was weaker than the last. Sleep was winning. In a final haze, she felt her temple brush against something firm yet comforting. It took a moment for her fatigued brain to register that her head had come to rest on the stranger's shoulder. Her eyes shot open in alarm, only to close again in surrender. She expected him to shift away or nudge her, but he didn't move. In her half-dreaming state, she sensed him looking down. If she were more alert, she might have felt humiliated, but right then, she was too drained to care. The gentle motion of the train lulled her deeper, and she allowed herself a moment of vulnerability she rarely indulged in. All the while, the stranger glanced at the papers peeking from Melissa's handbag, noticing the word eviction in bold letters. His gaze softened. As the neon lights of passing stations flickered across his face, he seemed to make a silent decision. In that small, rattling subway car, something shifted, though Melissa was far too exhausted to realize it. She fell asleep, missing her stop entirely, unaware that in just a few minutes, her life would take an unexpected turn. Melissa jerked awake at the jolt of the train doors sliding open. Her eyes darted around in confusion. The signs on the platform told her she was 2 stations past her usual stop. A cold dread settled in her stomach as she realized the late hour and how Rebecca might be worried or ready to leave. Ivy would be home alone if she didn't hurry. She tried to get up, but a mild dizziness forced her to sit back. She became acutely aware that her head was no longer resting on the man's shoulder. Instead, he sat calmly, watching her with a hint of concern in his green eyes. His immaculate suit was charcoal gray, matched with a tie in a subdued shade of blue. The first thought that crossed her mind was how out of place he seemed at this time of night on the L train. I'm so sorry," she stammered, straightening the messy bun at the back of her head. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. "I must have dozed off. I didn't mean to lean on you like that." "It's all right," he replied quietly. His voice had a soothing, even quality that made her heart pound faster than it should. "I noticed you seemed exhausted. I didn't want to disturb you." She tried to smile, but all that came out was a grimace of regret. "Thank you. I appreciate that. This is really embarrassing." He shook his head gently, as if to dismiss her discomfort. "Happens to the best of us." Melissa started gathering her things and realized with horror that the eviction notice had slipped halfway out of her handbag. She snatched it quickly, but not before she saw his gaze flicker over the printed words. Her chest tightened. The last thing she wanted was for a total stranger to see her personal struggles. Avoiding his eyes, she stood. I need to go," she muttered, clutching her belongings. Her knees felt unsteady, whether from the abrupt movement or the sting of embarrassment. Possibly both. The train was nearly empty, only a few passengers left in the far corners of the car. She moved toward the door, but the man rose as well, stepping out onto the platform after her. Melissa caught sight of the station name on the tiled wall. It was definitely not her usual stop, and it was nearly the last on the line. She felt a momentary flare of panic. "Oh no, I've gone too far. I can't believe I slept right through my station." He checked his watch. "There's a train heading back in about 10 minutes. "I can wait with you if that's all right." There was no pushiness in his tone, just a genuine offer of kindness. Melissa bit her lip. She wasn't used to relying on strangers, especially well-dressed ones who seemed like they might belong to a world she had no part in. But something about his demeanor was disarming, as though he understood she was under a lot of stress. Feeling a bit foolish, she nodded. "Thank you. I'm just worried. My daughter's at home, and I was supposed to be back half an hour ago." He raised his brows slightly. "Daughter, you must have your hands full." A dry laugh escaped her. "Full-time mom, part-time waitress at 2 different restaurants. So, yes, definitely." He gave a thoughtful nod but didn't say more, and she sensed he wasn't one to pry. They stood in an awkward silence for a moment on the deserted platform. Melissa looked around, noticing the flickering overhead lights, the peeling station ads, and the hum of far-off trains echoing through the tunnels. She pulled her coat tighter against the chilly draft. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw him glance again at the document in her hand. She quickly stuffed it into her bag. He must have read enough to know it wasn't good news. Feeling the need to change the subject, she offered a hesitant smile. "I'm Melissa, by the way." He returned the smile, a faint curve of his lips that softened his serious features. "Jeremy Cooper." She repeated his name under her breath, as if committing it to memory. There was something reassuring about it. "Thanks for waiting here with me." "No trouble at all. Just want to make sure you get back safely." A chime overhead announced the approaching train. Melissa felt relief wash over her, but she also couldn't shake the odd sensation that she'd just confided in someone she hardly knew, someone who had seen a glimpse of her personal crisis. And yet, he hadn't judged or pitied her aloud. He simply offered to keep her company until she could return home. As they boarded, he motioned for her to take a seat, then sat across the aisle. In the stark fluorescent light, she noticed the faint silver at his temples, the slight lines around his eyes, and a steady calm in his expression that hinted at a life very different from her own. She wondered if he was a lawyer, a banker, or maybe an executive. Either way, he was definitely someone with means, judging by the cut of his suit and the expensive watch on his wrist. Though she tried to gather her thoughts, all she could think about was Ivy waiting for her. She felt her phone vibrate and saw a text from Rebecca. "Is everything okay?" Melissa texted back that she'd explain when she got home. She dreaded the conversation, knowing full well the babysitter was frustrated by the late payments. But the bigger fear settling in her chest was that she might be out of a home entirely in a matter of weeks. Jeremy cast her a gentle smile as the doors slid shut and the train began its slow trek back. She clung to her seat, a silent prayer forming in her mind that she'd somehow find a way to keep a roof over her daughter's head. And in the midst of that troubled reflection, the stranger across the aisle remained a quiet, watchful presence. Something that both unsettled her and offered a glimmer of unexpected solace. Melissa hastened her pace through the dimly lit hallway of her apartment building, every footstep echoing off peeling wallpaper. She could almost sense Rebecca's anxiety. The babysitter, a soft-spoken woman in her late 50s, was perched on the edge of the faded couch, wearing her coat and clutching her purse tightly. Ivy, curled under a thin blanket, was fast asleep, her tiny form barely stirring at the sound of her mother's keys. "You're nearly an hour late," Rebecca whispered, rising from the couch. Concern laced her voice, but she tried to keep it gentle. "I tried calling." "Did something happen?" Melissa sighed, dropping her bag onto a small table by the door. "I missed my station, fell asleep on the train." She pinched the bridge of her nose in frustration. "I'm so sorry. I know you have your own family to get home to." Rebecca just nodded, clearly torn between sympathy and her own exhaustion. "I do, but I understand. You work so hard. Still, I need to talk to you about payment." Her voice trembled slightly. "I hate bringing it up again." Melissa felt a sting of shame. She had no good news on that front, not yet. "I know. I promise I'm trying," she murmured, glancing toward the table where she'd piled overdue bills. "Give me just a couple more days. I got some extra tips this week, and I'll get them to you." Rebecca studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But please, don't make me wait too long. I've got my own expenses to worry about." After the babysitter left, Melissa turned her attention to Ivy, brushing a stray curl from the girl's forehead. She could almost feel the weight of the eviction notice inside her bag. Half a dozen times that night, she'd been tempted to tear it up, as though that simple act could banish reality. But she knew the rent wouldn't vanish just because she wished it. She carefully lifted Ivy and carried her to the small bedroom. The flickering light from a street lamp illuminated the chipped paint on the walls. She tucked her daughter in, feeling a pang of guilt for the modest conditions they lived in. It was all she could afford on 2 waitress jobs. Even so, her savings were never enough to weather any unexpected blows, like the property owner suddenly deciding to raise the rent. In the silence, Melissa's thoughts turned to the stranger on the train, Jeremy Cooper. She remembered his green eyes, his reassuring tone. A puzzle started to form in her mind. Why was he on that train at such a late hour? Was he just another worker like her, or was there more to his story? She scolded herself for being curious. He was just a stranger who had shown her a small kindness, and she had no time for daydreams about interesting men, not with eviction looming over her head. She changed into an oversized t-shirt, then stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Dark circles underscored her brown eyes. Her hair was limp from the long day, strands pulling loose from the bun. She barely recognized herself. It wasn't that she had become pessimistic. She'd always tried to keep a spark of optimism for Ivy's sake, but the relentless tide of bills, late hours, and absent child support wore her down. As she washed her face, memories of past rejections and letdowns bubbled up. She recalled how her ex-boyfriend left when Ivy was just a toddler, running off with dreams of living freely without the burden of fatherhood. She'd adjusted, swallowing the disappointment and forging a path alone. Over the years, she'd learned not to trust easily, not to show weakness. It felt safer that way, even if it meant shouldering every burden on her own. Exhaustion pressed in on her once more, but she couldn't sleep. Instead, she rummaged in her bag, fishing out the eviction notice. The bold letters danced under the pale yellow light of the living room lamp. She skimmed the lines, her heart lurching at the official tone. She had 30 days to leave if she couldn't pay the overdue rent in full. At the bottom of the letter was her landlord's signature, a cold reminder that time was running out. She slumped onto the couch, hugging a throw pillow. A pang of hopelessness made her throat tighten. She whispered to herself, "Maybe I'll find another job, maybe another place." But Manhattan's housing costs were skyrocketing, and the rundown corners of Brooklyn she could afford were no better than her current situation. Anxiety gnawed at her, but she forced her eyes shut, trying to summon any scrap of energy she had left. She needed a way out of this spiral, maybe a new opportunity, a stroke of luck. The memory of Jeremy's sympathetic gaze flickered in her mind. It was unsettling how just recalling his kindness offered a slight comfort. She brushed it off as fatigue-induced illusion. Kindness didn't pay rent. She sank deeper into the couch, attempting to quiet the tempest inside her head. In the darkness, the city's muffled sounds drifted through the thin walls. Sirens wailed in the distance, and car tires splashed through puddles on the street. For now, all she could do was hope for a better tomorrow, though in her heart she could scarcely imagine how that could come to pass. Morning brought a dull grey light through the windows, revealing a kitchen sink piled high with dishes. Melissa rubbed the sleep from her eyes, yawning as she noticed Ivy already awake, perched at the small table with a bowl of cereal. The child's dark hair was tousled, and she wore an oversized pink t-shirt that read, "Dream Big." Ivy beamed at her mother. "Morning, Mom. I poured my own cereal. There wasn't much milk, though." Melissa ruffled her daughter's hair affectionately. "I'll pick some up later," she said, hiding the uneasy feeling that money for groceries was especially tight this week. "Thank you for being so grown up." Ivy giggled, proud of herself. She didn't need to know the full extent of their financial troubles. Melissa held back from talking about the eviction notice and the near-constant juggling of bills. She just wanted Ivy to feel safe, even if it meant carrying the burden alone. After a quick shower, Melissa stepped out in her waitress uniform, a plain black skirt and a white button-down shirt. She'd snag a coat on her way out. Autumn mornings in New York could be brisk. She fed Ivy, arranged for Rebecca to pick her up from school later, and headed to the restaurant for her first shift. At Garden's Diner, the clamor of pots and pans and the smell of sizzling bacon enveloped her. She tied on a stained apron and greeted her co-worker, Alicia, who was cleaning a nearby booth. Alicia was in her early 30s, always wearing colorful bandanas to keep her curly hair in place. She gave Melissa a sympathetic nod. "You look beat," Alicia said, wiping her hands on a rag. "Everything okay?" Melissa forced a small smile. "Same old story, just a mountain of bills. You know how it is." Alicia's face softened. "I hear you, but I heard something interesting you might want to know about. There's a new delivery startup looking to hire people with hands-on experience in the food industry. One of our customers left a flyer here yesterday." Melissa paused mid-step, setting down the coffee pot she was about to carry to a table. "A startup? What do they do?" Alicia shrugged lightly. "Something about sustainable delivery. They want folks who understand routes in the city, timing, that kind of thing. It's not just about carrying boxes, it's more strategic." Or so the flyer said. A spark of curiosity lit in Melissa's chest, mingling with caution. She wasn't sure she had the energy to chase another job prospect, but the possibility of stable work, or at least better pay, was tempting. "Do you still have the flyer?" she asked softly, glancing around to make sure the diner's manager, Mr. Thompson, wasn't listening. Alicia pulled it out from behind the counter and handed it over. The paper was crumpled, but the words were clear. "Cooper Sustainable Deliveries seeks driven individuals with real-world experience in restaurant logistics and customer service." There was a contact number and an office address in Manhattan's Lower East Side. Before Melissa could read further, Mr. Thompson barked from the kitchen. "Melissa, table 4's been waiting on coffee." "Coming," she replied, slipping the flyer into her apron pocket. The sudden tension of hope and uncertainty made her heart pound. Another job might be a lifeline, but what if it turned out to be just another dead end? Throughout her shift, she found her mind drifting back to the flyer. Each time, she reminded herself of her mounting debts and the eviction. She couldn't afford to be picky or scared of change, yet something inside her hesitated, the same internal voice that had kept her from taking risks in the past. She'd been disappointed too many times. Leaning on hopes that never materialized was dangerous. By the time the lunch rush ended, she was aching from carrying heavy trays and flashing practice smiles at hurried customers. Mr. Thompson cornered her by the cash register. He was a portly man who prided himself on running a tight ship, but he didn't seem completely heartless. "Melissa," he said, clearing his throat, "just a heads up. We might need to cut some hours next month. Business has been slow, and you know how it goes." She felt her stomach drop. "Right. Sure, I understand," she managed. Even though inside she was panicking, less work here meant fewer tips, which was the last thing she needed. As he walked away, she clutched the flyer in her pocket. Maybe it wasn't just a whim to look into this new venture. Maybe it was the only path that could save her and Ivy from a downward spiral. Taking a chance on something unknown felt reckless, but staying in this precarious position felt equally terrifying. The shift ended, and she trudged out onto the street, the afternoon sun offering little warmth. She checked her phone and saw another text from the landlord's office. "We need a payment plan or the eviction stands." Her pulse quickened. She thought of the flyer again. A new job, a new path, possibly a way out. She folded the paper carefully, slipping it into her handbag. If she didn't do something soon, she could lose everything. A tiny ember of hope flickered within her, but it was drowned in fear of taking yet another gamble. Even so, she realized she might not have a choice. The rumble of the subway filled Melissa's ears as she headed home after her shift. She clutched the flyer from the diner, reading it over again and again. Cooper Sustainable Deliveries. She wondered if the Cooper in question was any relation to Jeremy, the stranger from the train. It was a fleeting thought, but she dismissed it as pure coincidence. After all, Cooper was a common last name, and the city was vast. She closed her eyes, remembering how Jeremy had looked at her with genuine concern. That warmth in his gaze felt almost out of place, like a single ray of sunshine piercing through dark clouds. Yet she couldn't afford to be distracted by sentiment. Her reality was pressing down like a weight on her chest. She took a deep breath, resolving to call the number on the flyer. Maybe she could at least schedule an interview. But the fear crept in. What if they turned her down because she had no formal degree? All she had were years of hands-on experience. She tried to push the negativity aside. Once she arrived at her apartment, she was greeted by the usual chaos. A dripping kitchen sink, a living room cluttered with Ivy's coloring books, and Rebecca looking exhausted. The babysitter had tried her best to keep the place tidy, but it was an uphill battle. "I just put Ivy to bed," Rebecca said softly. "She stayed up longer than usual, asking when you'd be home." Melissa felt a pang of guilt. "Thank you, Rebecca." "I'm sorry for keeping you so late again." Rebecca set down the dish rag she'd been using to mop up the leak. "It's all right, but it's getting harder for me to stay this late. My husband's health isn't the best these days." Her words carried a gentle hint of urgency. Melissa nodded, swallowing the knot in her throat. She handed Rebecca half of her day's tips, promising more by the end of the week. Though it wasn't enough, Rebecca smiled politely and said goodnight. Alone in the quiet, Melissa sank onto the couch, fiddling with the flyer in her hands. She glanced at the eviction notice still resting on the coffee table. The two pieces of paper seemed to battle for her attention, one threatening her security, the other offering a slim chance at salvation. She pulled out her phone, took a steadying breath, and dialed the number. Her heart pounded with every ring. Finally, a warm female voice answered. "Cooper Sustainable Deliveries. This is Anna speaking. How may I help you?" Melissa's throat felt dry. "Hi, I'm calling about the job openings. I have experience in restaurant service and some delivery coordination. I'd really like to apply." Anna asked her a few basic questions, like her name, her work history, and her availability. As Melissa spoke, she found herself growing more confident, explaining how she often had to manage pickup schedules for the restaurants, coordinate takeout orders, and handle customer complaints. Anna seemed interested, and by the end of the call, she had scheduled Melissa for an initial interview. Melissa hung up, her pulse racing. She stared at her phone, half disbelieving she'd taken that step. Anxiety still simmered, but it was tempered by a small current of hope. If this job panned out, she might earn more and possibly get out of her current financial jam. Maybe she could keep her apartment or find somewhere better for Ivy. That night, she slept fitfully, tossing and turning as scenarios played out in her mind. She dreamed of an office full of bustling people who welcomed her with open arms, then turned into a nightmare of being laughed at for having no formal education. She woke with a start, heart pounding, and realized it was nearly dawn. By sunrise, she found herself in the kitchen, sipping instant coffee and scouring her closet for anything resembling office attire. She settled on a simple blouse and a skirt that was slightly more formal than her waitress uniform. She even tried to tame her hair into a neat bun. As she studied her reflection, she told herself she could do this. She was a mother who had survived worse challenges. She had to believe in her own resilience. She whispered a goodbye to Ivy, who was still asleep, then rushed out. Today was the interview. Every cell in her body buzzed with both dread and determination. If she failed this chance, she wasn't sure what else she could do. On the train ride to the Lower East Side, she clutched her phone, double-checking the directions to the address Anna had given. She silently reminded herself to speak clearly, be honest about her experience, and show her willingness to learn. A wave of nervous energy swept through her. This might be the single most important moment in her recent life. Stepping onto the busy Manhattan street, she drew a deep breath, trying to steady her pounding heart. Buildings rose around her like silent witnesses to her struggle. She spotted the address on a sleek glass door. Without letting herself hesitate further, she pulled it open and walked inside, bracing for whatever awaited her. A chill October wind rushed through the lobby as Melissa stepped inside Cooper Sustainable Deliveries for her scheduled interview. She clutched a simple leather folder containing her resume, a short list of restaurant shifts, to-go order coordination, and minimal office tasks. Under the bright, energy-efficient lights, she inhaled sharply, reminding herself that she belonged here as much as anyone else. A tall reception desk sat to the side, tended by a cheerful woman in her 40s. "Good morning," the receptionist greeted. "Name, please." "I'm Melissa Roberts. I have an appointment with Anna Rodriguez." Her voice felt steady, though her palms were damp. The receptionist smiled. "Yes, Ms. Roberts. She'll be right out." "You can have a seat." She gestured toward a waiting area, furnished with sleek, modern chairs and leafy potted plants that lent a natural warmth to the space. Melissa nodded in thanks and sank onto one of the chairs. Despite her attempt at composure, her heart raced. The open layout of the office was visible beyond the glass-walled conference rooms. People in casual business attire bustled around, some carrying laptops, others chatting in clusters. It was a world away from the diner's clanking silverware and the sour smell of coffee grounds. Moments later, a poised woman in her early 50s approached. She had short, graying hair styled in a neat bob and wore a tasteful navy blue blazer over a floral blouse. "Melissa?" she asked with a welcoming smile. Melissa stood quickly. "Yes, it's nice to meet you," she managed. "I'm Anna Rodriguez, the HR director here." "We spoke on the phone." She extended her hand in a firm but friendly gesture. "Come on back. We'll chat in my office." Melissa followed her through a hallway dotted with inspirational posters, photos of cyclists delivering packages, quotes about environmental stewardship, and local outreach events. It seemed that the company took its sustainable mission seriously, something that intrigued Melissa even more. She had never considered herself an eco-warrior, but she admired any business that tried to do genuine good. Inside Anna's office, large windows let in natural light, casting soft rays across neatly stacked papers on a wooden desk. Several pictures of Anna with friends and family adorned the shelves. Melissa noticed Anna smiling in a photo beside a man with kind green eyes. She froze for a second. He looked very much like Jeremy Cooper, the man from the train. But Anna ushered her to a chair, and she didn't have time to dwell on it. "So, Melissa," Anna began, settling across from her, "I'd love to hear about your work background, what brings you here, and how you see yourself fitting into Cooper Sustainable Deliveries." Melissa took a breath, clasping her hands to stop them from shaking. She explained her years in food service, how she'd often been responsible for coordinating takeout orders at 2 busy restaurants. It might not sound high profile, but she juggled scheduling, mapped out delivery routes for drivers, and handled customer complaints. She emphasized how this real-world experience gave her a unique understanding of the challenges of delivery logistics. Anna nodded attentively. "That's valuable, you know," she said. "Sometimes it's the practical know-how that makes all the difference. We're not just about fancy apps and data. We need people who understand what's happening on the ground." Encouraged, Melissa continued, speaking about her passion for problem-solving. She admitted that she didn't have a college degree, but quickly added that she was a fast learner. Anna maintained eye contact, offering an occasional approving smile. There was no condescension, no sign of judgment for Melissa's limited academic credentials. After taking notes, Anna leaned forward. You mentioned on the phone that you're a single parent. Melissa stiffened, worried it might count against her. Yes, I have a 7-year-old daughter, Ivy. She's my world, and also my motivation to find better opportunities. Anna gave a gentle nod. I was a single mother, too, for many years. My daughter is grown now, but I remember the balancing act all too well. She offered a compassionate look. We try to accommodate schedules here when possible. We're big on employee well-being. Relief flooded Melissa. She could feel the tension melting from her shoulders. That means a lot. I'm used to places where they don't exactly prioritize flexibility. Anna chuckled wryly. I've worked in those places. It's draining. She glanced at the clock, then stood. I'd like to introduce you to a colleague of mine before we proceed further. He's actually in charge of evaluating new team members for logistics. It's not a formal interview with him, more of a quick hello. Of course, Melissa answered, rising with her folder clutched to her side. They walked through a corridor lined with glass-walled offices. Melissa thought she might catch sight of the man from the photo, the possible Jeremy Cooper, but each face that drifted by was unfamiliar. Eventually, Anna stopped at a door marked Logistics Supervisor and knocked lightly. A voice from inside answered, Come in. The man behind the desk was in his mid-30s, with a lean frame and a friendly grin. Martin, this is Melissa. She's a strong candidate for the new coordinator position. Thought you two should chat. Martin swiveled in his chair, regarding Melissa with curiosity. Hey there, he greeted in a casual tone. Mind if I ask you a few questions about route planning? While Anna stepped outside to take a quick phone call, Martin grilled Melissa on typical delivery windows, dealing with traffic congestion, and how she might handle unpredictable variables like weather or driver absences. Much to her own surprise, she answered with confidence, pulling from her practical experiences in the bustling Manhattan restaurant scene. By the end, Martin seemed impressed. That's great, he said, tapping his pen on the desk. We need people who understand that real life doesn't always follow the spreadsheet. Anna re-entered, smiling. I see you two are hitting it off. Martin, thanks for taking a few minutes. Any time, he replied, standing to shake Melissa's hand. Welcome aboard, hopefully. Melissa left his office feeling a sense of possibility stirring inside her. She'd come expecting a stressful interrogation, but instead she found an environment that valued what she had to offer. She still didn't fully comprehend the company's structure or how high a position she could realistically aim for, but a flicker of excitement replaced her usual dread. Anna led her back to the reception area, explaining that she'd be in touch soon. Melissa thanked her warmly, her voice trembling with gratitude. As she headed for the exit, she spotted the photo on a nearby wall, Anna with the same green-eyed man, both in graduation gowns. The plaque read, Anna Rodriguez and Jeremy Cooper, Stanford class of 2004. Melissa's heart jolted. It had to be the same Jeremy she'd met on the subway. Her mind swirled with questions, but Anna was already bidding her goodbye. Clutching her folder, Melissa stepped out onto the busy sidewalk, the city's noise rising to meet her. She hardly noticed the passing cars and pedestrians. If the founder or co-founder of this company was the stranger who'd witnessed her exhaustion on that late-night train, what did that mean for her future here? Yet she felt no immediate dread. Instead, she felt a stirring of optimism, mixed with a tinge of curiosity. A guiding hand, indeed, seemed to be at work in her life, though she had no idea where it might lead. The email from Anna arrived just 2 days later, much sooner than Melissa anticipated. It offered her a position in the logistics team, an entry-level coordinator role with potential for rapid growth if she proved herself. Melissa could hardly believe it. The salary wasn't extravagant, but it was significantly more stable than her current juggling act at 2 diners. Moreover, the job came with benefits, something she'd lacked for years. She read the email again and again, still in her cramped living room, hands trembling. A wave of relief washed over her, followed by a twinge of fear. Accepting this job meant she couldn't keep both diner shifts, and letting go of even one felt risky. But deep down, she knew she'd reached a breaking point. If she wanted a real future for Ivy, she needed to step away from the dead-end pattern that was draining her spirit. The next morning, she headed to Garden's diner, heart pounding. She found Mr. Thompson hunched over a stack of invoices, wearing his usual scowl. Clearing her throat, Melissa approached him. "Sir, do you have a moment?" He glanced up, eyes dull with early morning fatigue. "Make it quick." "I've been offered a new job," she began, voice trembling. "I'll be leaving my position here at the end of the week." Mr. Thompson dropped his pen and stared. "Really? You're one of my best waitresses, Melissa." She swallowed hard, bracing for a backlash. "I appreciate the time I've spent here, I really do, but I need something more stable, with a future." He rubbed his temples. "Well, I can't say I'm thrilled, but I get it. Times are tough, and we can't afford to keep giving out hours like we used to." There was a bitterness in his tone, though a flicker of regret crossed his features. "Do what you got to do. I'll settle your last paycheck Friday." It was less dramatic than she'd feared. Nonetheless, she walked away feeling both a sense of victory and a pang of sadness. She'd spent years at the diner, forging a routine she'd grown accustomed to. Breaking away meant facing new anxieties, a different schedule, new responsibilities, and unfamiliar co-workers. But she held on to the memory of Anna's welcoming smile and Martin's easygoing nature. Maybe for once, she was heading into a workplace that wouldn't grind her down. Over the next few days, she arranged for Ivy's after-school care more carefully, ensuring Rebecca wouldn't be stuck waiting until late into the night. Melissa even considered the possibility that, with a better income, she might not need Rebecca every single evening. It felt surreal to think she could spend actual quality time with her daughter without collapsing from exhaustion. On her final shift at Garden's diner, Alicia cornered Melissa by the coffee station. "So, you're really doing it, huh?" Alicia's tone was a mixture of excitement and envy. Melissa nodded, passing a mug to a customer. "I start next Monday. I'm nervous, but it's a good chance." Alicia smiled wistfully. "I'm happy for you. Maybe I'll do something like that someday." She pressed a small, folded note into Melissa's hand. "My number." "Don't be a stranger, okay?" Melissa pocketed the note, touched by her co-worker's kindness. "I won't. Thank you for pointing me to that flyer. It changed everything." As the clock neared the end of her shift, she served her last table, a mother with 2 rowdy boys. Her eyes lingered on them, reminded of her own child. When the mother left a small tip, apologizing for the messy table, Melissa smiled and said it was no trouble. Part of her understood the exhaustion in that woman's eyes all too well. When she clocked out, Mr. Thompson handed her a small envelope. Inside was her paycheck, plus a modest bonus. "Just a thank you for the years you put in," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. Tears pricked at her eyes. She'd never expected extra money from him, but she recognized it as his quiet way of wishing her well. With a heartfelt nod, she exited the diner, stepping out onto the street one last time as an employee there. The weight of relief was almost dizzying. She took a moment to breathe in the crisp autumn air, the sunshine catching dust motes in front of her. Change was always terrifying, yet she could already sense a glimmer of hope. She had no idea how a corporate job would challenge her, but she needed this leap of faith. That evening, she told Ivy about the new job. The child squealed in excitement, hugging her mother tight. "Does that mean we can maybe buy a new bike sometime?" Ivy asked with wide, hopeful eyes. Melissa laughed softly. "We'll see, sweetie. One thing at a time." For the first time in a long while, Melissa felt like she was standing on the threshold of something better. She still had the eviction notice to contend with, but maybe now she had a fighting chance to save their home or find a better one. With that faint optimism pulsing through her, she made dinner and settled in with Ivy for the night, thoughts drifting toward Monday morning and the unknown path ahead. Monday dawned with a clear sky, a rarity in the midst of New York's unpredictable autumn. Melissa hurried out the door, her heart in her throat. She wore a modest blouse and black slacks she'd managed to buy on sale over the weekend, determined to look professional. AV was at school, unaware of her mother's butterflies, excited only by the promise of an after-school park trip if Melissa got home on time. Arriving at the Cooper Sustainable Deliveries office, Melissa immediately noticed a contrast to the hurried, tense environment of a restaurant. The lobby was calm, though bustling with employees greeting each other as they came in. A young man with a messenger bag flipped through a digital schedule on his tablet, while an older woman in glasses chatted with a co-worker about a project. Plants and modern decor gave the space a purposeful, eco-conscious vibe. She made her way to the reception area, where the same receptionist from before greeted her warmly. "Welcome, Mrs. Roberts. Anna is expecting you. Let me just show you to the orientation room." Following the receptionist, Melissa entered a medium-sized conference room with glass walls. Two other new hires were already seated around a large wooden table. One was a lean young man named Kevin, fresh out of college, his eyes shining with excitement. The other was Cheryl, a mother in her mid-40s, who offered a friendly smile when Melissa introduced herself. Cheryl confided she'd worked in bookkeeping for small bakeries and was looking for a stable position with benefits. Shortly thereafter, Anna appeared, beaming like a proud mentor. "Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to have you join our team. Today, we'll cover company culture, sustainability goals, and how each department works. Then, Martin will explain the logistics side in more detail." Melissa settled into her chair, pen in hand, absorbing every word. Anna outlined the core mission of CSD, to create an eco-friendly delivery service that minimized carbon emissions by employing electric bikes, hybrid vans, and careful route planning. The company also partnered with local non-profits to deliver goods to underserved communities. As Anna spoke, Melissa felt an unexpected swell of pride. She was part of something that mattered, a venture aiming not just for profit, but also for social impact. Her mind flicked briefly to Jeremy Cooper, whom she still hadn't seen in person since that night on the train. She wondered where he was in this large operation, if he was truly the founder or one of many executives. The orientation session ended with a quick coffee break. Cheryl approached Melissa, balancing a paper cup in hand. "So, you're a single mom, too?" she asked, her tone empathetic. Melissa nodded. "Yeah, my daughter's 7. Balancing everything can be challenging." Cheryl's face lit with understanding. "My daughter just finished college, but I remember how tough it was doing it all alone. I think you'll like it here. Anna told me the company is family-friendly." They chatted about schedules and childcare, while Kevin chimed in, excited about the innovative software the company used for route optimization. Melissa smiled, finding his enthusiasm contagious, even if she felt slightly out of her depth when they mentioned algorithms and coding. Still, the environment felt supportive in a way she'd rarely experienced. After the break, Martin took center stage, guiding them through a series of slides that showed routes across Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens. "We're all about reducing unnecessary trips," he explained, pointing to color-coded maps on the screen. "Real-time data helps us adjust deliveries on the fly, and that's where your practical know-how kicks in, Melissa. You've been juggling routes in your own way at the restaurants, right?" She nodded, recalling the chaos of handling multiple to-go orders while ensuring none arrived late. "Yes, but nothing as high-tech as this." Martin smiled. "You'll catch on fast. We need people who can think on their feet. Sometimes, software doesn't account for real-life surprises like a sudden street closure or an event that causes a traffic jam. That's where human insight is invaluable." Melissa felt a spark of confidence. She had spent years dealing with the unexpected: angry customers, broken ovens, severe weather, staff shortages. Adapting to hiccups was second nature. Perhaps she'd been training for this job all along without realizing it. By the end of the day, she was assigned a small cubicle near Martin's office, complete with a computer and a minimalistic set of office supplies. It felt like a world away from the clamor of the diner, but in a good way. Cheryl gave her a parting wave, and Kevin promised to help if she got stuck with the new software. Exiting the building, Melissa squinted against the afternoon sun. She felt a flicker of satisfaction, tinged with apprehension. So much to learn, but at least there was a safety net of helpful colleagues. This realm of organized conference rooms, data spreadsheets, and sustainability goals was new and somewhat intimidating. Yet she sensed she had made the right decision by crossing into this unfamiliar territory. She caught herself smiling on the subway ride home, thinking of Ivy's face when she told her all about her first day. There was a lightness in her chest she couldn't recall feeling in a long time. Maybe she was allowed to hope, after all. The fluorescent hum of the office became Melissa's new backdrop. Instead of barking orders and clattering dishes, she now navigated spreadsheets that tracked deliveries in real time. Her days began with a strong cup of coffee at her cubicle, followed by quick syncs with Martin or Cheryl to discuss the day's schedule. Every so often, Kevin would pop by, eager to share tips on how to manipulate the routing software more efficiently. Though the environment was far more comfortable than her previous jobs, Melissa struggled at first. Entering and analyzing data felt foreign. Learning to interpret color-coded traffic heat maps took trial and error. She spent her lunch breaks watching tutorial videos, scribbling notes on a small notepad. Yet she remained determined, fueled by the knowledge that this was her chance to create a stable future for Ivy. Anna, true to her word, acted like a mentor. She'd invite Melissa for brief chats in her office, checking on her well-being and addressing any concerns about the transition. On one such occasion, Anna leaned back in her chair and asked, "How are you finding the change?" "It must be a big shift from waitressing." Melissa hesitated, trying to put her feelings into words. "It's challenging, but in a good way. I just don't want to fall behind. Everyone else seems so tech-savvy." Anna smiled gently. "Give it time. We hired you for your real-world problem-solving. That can't always be taught." Encouraged, Melissa carried on, each day becoming a bit less daunting. After her shift, she'd rush home to help Ivy with homework and maybe enjoy a quiet dinner together. She was still on a tight budget, but the steady paycheck gave her a glimmer of security. She even managed to pay down a portion of her overdue rent, hoping to delay the eviction. One Friday afternoon, as the week wound to a close, she noticed a minor crisis brewing among the delivery drivers. A few drivers had called in sick, creating a backlog of packages for a group of local shops that partnered with CSD. While Martin fretted over how to reassign the routes, Melissa approached him with a suggestion. "You should stagger the remaining drivers and shuffle drop-off times," she proposed, showing him a rough plan on her screen. "If we prioritize these shops first, we can handle the farthest delivery zones after, since they typically have less traffic in the late afternoon." Martin rubbed his chin thoughtfully, studying the plan. "This is good. You drew this up on the fly." Melissa shrugged. "It's just something I learned balancing dinner rush orders back at the restaurant. We used to run into the same problem if people called in sick." He grinned. Let's implement it. Within an hour, the plan was in motion, and the drivers reported fewer delays than expected. Martin clapped her on the shoulder. "Nice work, Melissa." The praise felt oddly exhilarating. At her diner jobs, compliments had been scarce. Now, seeing a direct impact of her suggestions on the company's performance gave her a sense of genuine achievement. Word traveled fast among her colleagues, and soon Cheryl teased her about being the root saver of the day. By the end of that evening, Melissa was tidying her cubicle when Anna passed by with a look of pride. "Keep it up," Anna said softly, tapping her folder against Melissa's desk. "You're doing great." Melissa thanked her, then turned off her computer. It struck her that she still hadn't seen Jeremy Cooper around. Part of her wondered if he worked remotely or perhaps traveled for business. She occasionally glimpsed his photo on brochures or the company's website, him in a crisp suit, smiling at a press event. But she couldn't shake the memory of him in the subway that night, sitting quietly beside her while she slept. It felt surreal to think that her new boss might be that same unassuming man. On the train ride home, she replayed the day's small victories, a slow smile building. The old anxiety of never having enough money still gnawed at her, and she wasn't out of the woods with the eviction. But each paycheck brought her a step closer to relief. Maybe soon she could negotiate a better payment plan or, if needed, find a new place that cost less. For once, she felt like she had options. Stepping off at her stop, she recalled her promise to Ivy, a weekend spent watching a movie together and maybe baking cookies if time allowed. She felt a surge of warmth, realizing she could actually enjoy little moments with her daughter now. She whispered a silent prayer of thanks for this new foothold in life, determined to hold on no matter what hurdles still lay ahead. The following week brought a mix of calm routine and occasional surprises. Melissa found herself forging new friendships with fellow employees, each revealing their own story. Candice, a lively marketing specialist in her late 20s, visited Melissa's cubicle regularly, chatting about digital campaigns aimed at attracting eco-conscious customers. She offered pointers on presenting ideas in a more polished way, explaining that visuals and bullet points could help even the simplest proposal shine. Then there was Cheryl, who had a teenage son and instantly bonded with Melissa over the challenges of single parenting. Sometimes they'd linger by the coffee machine, trading tips on how to handle moody children or stretch a grocery budget. Cheryl had a gentle resilience that reminded Melissa of her own mother, someone who managed to keep going despite difficult circumstances. They weren't just co-workers. They felt like allies, each trying to balance personal pressures while contributing to something meaningful at CSD. It was a far cry from the cutthroat work environments Melissa had heard about. She realized how vital it was to find people who genuinely wanted each other to succeed. One breezy afternoon, just as Melissa was about to leave for her lunch break, Anna appeared with a polite knock on the cubicle wall. "Mind if I steal you for a few minutes?" she asked, a twinkle in her eye. Melissa pushed aside her notes on route schedules. "Sure," she replied, curious. Anna guided her to a small conference room where two other staff members were gathered, a young woman named Priya from the Community Outreach Department, and a middle-aged man in a tailored suit. Melissa's pulse quickened as she recognized him from the company website. It was Marcus Barnes, the CFO. He had a serious air about him, grey hair slicked back, and an assessing glance that made her slightly uneasy. "Marcus and Priya are working on a proposal to expand our services to a few large corporate clients," Anna explained. "They want to see if we can handle a higher volume, specifically for bulk deliveries in Manhattan." Priya offered a friendly wave. "I've heard about your route optimization skills, Melissa. We're exploring ways to scale up in an efficient manner without sacrificing our sustainability mission." Anna suggested you might have some insights. Melissa gave a cautious nod, trying to ignore the butterflies in her stomach. Speaking in front of the CFO was intimidating enough, let alone contributing meaningful ideas. Well, from what I've seen so far, we have a good system, but it needs more drivers or improved scheduling if we're going to handle large-scale orders. Right now, if we got a giant influx of deliveries, we could end up stretched too thin, especially during peak times. Marcus arched an eyebrow. Interesting. How do you propose we avoid bottlenecks? His tone was brisk, maybe even skeptical. Melissa inhaled slowly, recalling some notes she'd made when analyzing the busiest routes. We could consider hiring additional part-time drivers who specialize in the densest areas, Midtown and the financial district, during rush hours. That way, we keep our core sustainable approach with electric bikes and hybrid vans, but we're not forcing the same small team to cover an overwhelming territory all at once. Priya's eyes lit up. That could maintain our quick turnaround times while still minimizing carbon impact. Marcus tapped a pen on the table. Part-time drivers. We'd need to ensure training and reliability. We can't just bring in random temps. Melissa offered a slight shrug. True. But maybe we can partner with courier schools or local training programs. Build a pool of qualified drivers who understand our mission. The key is to scale up responsibly. He studied her for a moment, lips pressed together. Then he turned to Anna. She's got a point. I'll need to see the costs and potential return, but it's worth exploring. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Priya jotting down notes. Melissa contributed ideas whenever they asked, though she kept her remarks concise. Throughout it all, Marcus remained impassive. She couldn't tell if he was impressed or merely tolerating her input. At the end of the meeting, Marcus stood, smoothing a hand over his tie. I'll be in touch, Anna. Keep me updated. Then, with a curt nod in Melissa's direction, he left the room. Priya exhaled, grinning. He's not always that stiff, I promise. She turned to Melissa. Great thoughts. I'll follow up with you soon. When they were gone, Anna clapped Melissa lightly on the shoulder. Way to hold your own in there. Not everyone stands up to Marcus Barnes so calmly. I was anything but calm, Melissa admitted with a shaky laugh, but thank you for bringing me in. Don't underestimate yourself, Anna replied gently. Marcus might seem intimidating, but he appreciates competence. Just keep doing what you're doing. Melissa left the conference room feeling both exhilarated and drained. It was her first taste of corporate politics, balancing a business's expansion goals with the company's ethical mission. She never imagined she'd find herself brainstorming with a CFO about staffing models, yet here she was, offering solutions without a formal education in the field. Her life was changing in ways she couldn't have predicted just weeks ago. On her way back to her desk, she passed by Candace, who quirked a brow. Saw you in the conference room with Marcus. Yikes, talk about trial by fire. Melissa gave a nervous smile. Let's just say I'm glad I survived. She settled into her chair, her mind buzzing with the implications of the conversation. She still didn't know how far she wanted to climb this corporate ladder, but it felt good to be taken seriously for once. And it struck her that having allies like Anna, Priya, and even the more distant Marcus might help her navigate these unfamiliar waters. She adjusted a photo of Ivy on her desk, feeling grateful for the quiet confidence that was building inside her day by day. Late one evening, just as Melissa was about to log off and head home, a hush fell over the office. Martin emerged from his office, looking tense, his phone glued to his ear. Through the transparent walls of the conference room, Anna and Marcus appeared in deep discussion, their expressions troubled. Curiosity gnawed at Melissa, but she told herself it was probably just another financial hurdle or technical glitch. Just as she was shutting down her computer, Martin signaled her over. "Hey, got a minute?" She tucked her bag under her arm. "Sure, what's going on?" He lowered his voice, glancing around. "We've got a serious situation. One of our major delivery partners is threatening to pull out unless we handle a sudden influx of orders they claim we're not equipped to manage. They say we're too small scale. This could be a big hit to our reputation if they walk." A prickle of alarm traveled up Melissa's spine. "Is there any way to accommodate them?" Martin let out a weary sigh. "They need us to prove we can handle double the deliveries for the next 2 weeks. No mistakes, no delays. If we can't, they'll switch to a larger competitor." Melissa chewed on her lip, thoughts whirling. Cooper's sustainable deliveries prided itself on being thorough, but doubling capacity overnight was daunting. "What's the plan so far?" "We're trying to schedule more drivers. Some staff are working late to tweak software constraints. I was hoping you could review the route assignments once we finalize them. You're good at spotting real-life snags. This was a significant responsibility. If she messed up, it could cost CSD a vital client. Yet, she couldn't turn away from the challenge." She nodded. "I'll stay and help." They rushed to the main conference room, where Anna, Marcus, and a few other department heads were gathered around a projector screen. The mood was tense. Phones buzzed, and laptops were open with spreadsheets, route simulations, and urgent email threads. Melissa slipped into a seat next to Anna, who managed a faint smile. "Thanks for volunteering," Anna whispered. "We need all hands on deck." Hours passed in a blur of frantic calculations. Melissa focused on inputting realistic buffer times between deliveries, accounting for Manhattan traffic peaks. She proposed grouping certain deliveries by neighborhood rather than by time slot to reduce unnecessary travel. At one point, she realized the software's default setting didn't account for holiday parades that would close off multiple streets. She inserted that data manually, shaking her head at how quickly a route plan could implode if they overlooked a single event. Marcus, leaning over her shoulder, asked brisk questions. Despite his demanding demeanor, he seemed genuinely interested in her input. Whenever she explained a logistical challenge based on her waitress experience, he would nod in thoughtful silence. Though he rarely praised openly, Melissa sensed a grudging respect in his gaze. By midnight, they had a tentative blueprint for managing the increased workload. Anna yawned, fighting exhaustion, but clapped Melissa's shoulder. "Let's hope this holds up in the real world." Martin walked Melissa to the elevator, both of them bleary-eyed. "You did good," he said quietly. "No guarantee the client will be satisfied, but we stand a fighting chance now." Melissa mustered a tired smile. "I'm just hoping we don't collapse by day 3. He chuckled dryly. "That's the spirit." Stepping out into the cool night air, Melissa realized her phone had multiple missed calls from Rebecca. Panic gripped her. She dialed back immediately, apologizing profusely. Rebecca's voice crackled on the other end, heavy with concern and a hint of frustration, but she reassured Melissa that Ivy was asleep and safe. Melissa promised a little extra in next week's payment, feeling a stab of guilt that she was still behind on her babysitter's fees. Hanging up, she thought about the delicate balance she was trying to maintain, chasing success at her new job while caring for Ivy and trying to stave off eviction. Yet despite the chaos, she felt more alive than she had in years. She had a real stake in something, a team that counted on her input and the possibility of forging a better life. As she made her way to the subway, she reminded herself that no journey worth taking came without risks. She only hoped that when the dust settled, CSD would keep their major client, and she'd be one step closer to providing the security Ivy deserved. But that outcome was far from guaranteed, and the days ahead would put Melissa to the test like never before. Monday morning, arrived with a swirl of chaos at Cooper Sustainable Deliveries. The plan devised by Melissa, Martin, and the rest of the late-night team was now being tested in the real world, and it was already pushing everyone's limits. Melissa hurried into the office, balancing a coffee cup and a pastry bag she'd picked up on the way. She felt the undercurrent of tension in the air even before she reached her desk. Martin stood by the operations board, which displayed color-coded maps and columns of delivery routes. His brow was furrowed as he updated the day's tasks. "We've got 3 drivers out sick," he announced to anyone who would listen. "I need immediate backups." Cheryl, juggling spreadsheets in a corner, looked over. "I'm already trying to track down part-timers," she said, typing furiously on her keyboard. "But we might have to reroute some packages to the other borough hubs. This volume is insane." Melissa set her coffee aside and joined them, scanning the board. Her heart skipped a beat. The client they were trying to impress was dumping nearly twice as many parcels as predicted. Traffic updates glowed red across Midtown. She recalled the hours they had spent perfecting the route schedules, but none of that mattered if they couldn't fill every driver slot. She took a breath. "Let me check the backup driver roster. I might have a few phone numbers from that orientation we discussed." She hurried to her computer, searching for the list of qualified temps. While she typed, messages kept popping up, alerts about missing drivers, weather updates predicting afternoon showers, and stressed-out emails from the client's dispatch manager. Nearby, Candice from marketing hovered, chewing her lip. "I've been fielding calls from the client's PR department. They want to showcase our partnership on social media, but we can't do that if we're behind schedule. How are we looking?" Melissa forced a confident tone she didn't entirely feel. "We'll manage. Maybe hold off on any big announcements until we're sure we can deliver on time." Candice nodded, slipping away to handle her side of the growing storm. Melissa exhaled and resumed her frantic data entry. It felt as though the entire office was working on borrowed energy. Even Anna's usual calm had frayed around the edges as she fielded phone call after phone call, trying to reassure the client that everything was under control. By late morning, Martin managed to secure 2 backup drivers, though neither had extensive experience with electric bikes. "We'll take what we can get," he muttered, massaging his temples. "Melissa, can you train them on the fly? Show them how we optimize routes here?" She nodded, though her pulse pounded in her ears. Teaching new hires in the middle of a crisis wasn't ideal. She spent the next hour walking the drivers through the basics of the routing system, how to scan packages, and what to do if a street was unexpectedly blocked. Despite their wide eyes and nervous questions, she kept her voice steady. Encouragement and clarity were all she could offer. Noon came and went. The backlog was shrinking, but so was everyone's patience. Melissa grabbed her phone to update the client's dispatch manager, letting them know they were still on track for the main deliveries. Her heart sank at the manager's irritated tone, yet she stuck to professional courtesy. When she hung up, she realized her hands were shaking. Anna materialized at her desk. "You holding up?" she asked, concern etched in her features. Melissa offered a weary smile. "Barely, but yes, I'll be fine." Anna gave a supportive nod. "I spoke to Marcus. He wants a status report soon. I'll see if I can stall him a bit." Then she leaned in, dropping her voice. "We knew this would be intense, but we need to remember why we're doing it. The big client might open doors for better funding, or they might walk. Let's do our best." Melissa watched Anna hurry away, her stomach in knots. This felt like a battle on multiple fronts: managing staff, satisfying a demanding client, and upholding the sustainability promises that defined the company. She also suspected that if it all went wrong, heads would roll, starting with Martin and trickling down. She, as a newcomer and key figure in the route planning, would be an easy scapegoat. Swallowing her nerves, she refocused on the screen. Another wave of deliveries was set to deploy in an hour. She quickly rerouted packages that overlapped too heavily in the same neighborhoods. Her phone rang again. It was the babysitter, Rebecca. Wincing, Melissa answered, bracing for a scolding about working late. Rebecca's voice was quiet but firm. "Just letting you know, if you run past 6 again, I might not be able to stay. I've got my own commitments, Melissa." Melissa bit her lip, scanning the digital clock on her monitor. It was already well past lunchtime, and she saw no end in sight. "I understand, Rebecca. I'll keep you posted. Thank you." She hung up, feeling a pang of guilt and fear. Ivy needed her, yet the office demanded every ounce of her focus. Torn between responsibilities, she pressed on, determined not to crumble. As afternoon stretched into evening, the last batch of outgoing deliveries was handed off to newly prepped drivers. The storm of tasks didn't disappear, but it eased enough for Melissa to breathe. Leaning back in her chair, she massaged the tense muscles in her neck and exchanged a glance with Martin. They both looked exhausted, but there was a shared sense of relief flickering in his eyes. They had survived the first day of this massive test, but there were many more to come. And though the clock raced mercilessly, Melissa clung to the hope that each hard-won adjustment, each rerouted delivery, inched them closer to proving they could handle this contract together. The next few days were a blur of early mornings and late nights. The crisis with the big client continued, each day presenting new hurdles to overcome. Delivery volumes refused to slow, testing every aspect of CSD's carefully laid plans. Despite the chaos, Melissa noticed subtle triumphs, drivers who grew more confident by the hour, or Martin's route optimization that shaved minutes off each stop. The whole team seemed galvanized by the challenge. One evening, after managing to leave the office at a semi-reasonable hour, Melissa trudged back to her Brooklyn apartment. Her mind spun with route charts and missed calls from Rebecca. The hallway lights flickered ominously, as they always did. She almost laughed at the contrast, high-tech solutions at work and barely functional lighting at home. Inside, she found Ivy, wide awake despite the late hour, flipping through a worn picture book. "Mommy!" her daughter squealed, leaping up and wrapping tiny arms around Melissa's legs. "I missed you," guilt churned in Melissa's stomach. "I missed you too, sweetheart." She scooped Ivy into a warm hug. "Why are you still awake?" Ivy made a face. "I tried sleeping, but I got scared. Sometimes I hear weird noises in the hallway." Melissa gently kissed her forehead. The building's paper-thin walls and occasional rowdy neighbors were no secret. "I'm sorry, baby. I'll tuck you in. And tomorrow, I promise we'll have some story time before bed if I can get home earlier." A voice from the living room startled her. Rebecca stood by the window, purse in hand. "I was about to call you again, Melissa." "It's nearly 10. She set Ivy down, urging her to brush her teeth. "I'm so sorry. We had another situation at work. I'll pay for the extra hours this weekend." Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "All right, just please try to keep me informed." With that, she left, and Melissa exhaled, relieved the conversation hadn't escalated into an argument. Later, once Ivy was asleep, Melissa sank onto the couch, glancing at the stack of unopened mail on the coffee table. Her eyes landed on the eviction notice, still pinned under a few grocery flyers. She knew time was running out. The partial payment she'd made had only bought a brief extension. If she couldn't settle the rent arrears, she'd face the real prospect of moving out, a daunting thought in a city as expensive as New York. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her worries. She hesitated. No one ever knocked at this hour unless it was urgent. Peering through the peephole, she saw her landlord, Mr. Phillips, a tall man in his 60s with a stern face. Her stomach flipped. Opening the door a crack, she forced a polite greeting. "Evening, Mr. Phillips. Everything all right?" He cleared his throat. "Got a minute to talk about the rent situation?" She stepped aside, letting him in. The hallway light behind him cast a harsh glow, accentuating the lines of impatience on his face. "I'm still short on cash," she admitted, voice trembling. "But I just got a better job. I'm trying to—" He held up a hand. "I've given you time, Melissa, more than usual. I'm running a business here too. The mortgage on this building isn't cheap. If you can't cover the full amount by the end of the month, I'll have no choice but to proceed with the eviction." Her throat tightened. "I understand. I'm doing my best." He nodded, though his eyes remained hard. "I'll need something concrete, or I'll have to put your unit up for rent. I can't keep waiting indefinitely." She promised to have an update soon, swallowing her panic as she closed the door behind him. The reality struck her anew. She was walking a tightrope at work, fighting to keep a major client happy, while facing the very real possibility of losing her home. Even her new salary might not be enough to wipe out the debt quickly. Desperate thoughts filled her mind. She considered a small loan, but banks would see her minimal credit score and balk. What about borrowing from friends, Alicia or Cheryl? She hated the idea, feeling shame coil in her stomach. No, she'd figure something else out. Maybe the big client's success would mean a bonus, or at least job security. Then she could negotiate a payment plan. Exhausted, she tidied up the scattered toys and mail, then quietly checked on Ivy. Her daughter slept peacefully, unaware of the adult turmoil swirling outside her dreams. Melissa leaned against the doorframe, the weight of the day pressing on her chest. She reminded herself, "You've come this far. You can handle this." Still, doubts loomed like a dark shadow. No matter how capable she felt at work, her home life threatened to crumble beneath her feet. At length, she changed into pajamas, telling herself to focus on the steps forward. Tomorrow, she'd push harder at work, maybe clock in some overtime. She'd confront each obstacle as it came. Yet as she drifted into fitful sleep, the sting of uncertainty refused to fade. The eviction notice imprinted on her mind like a countdown she couldn't escape. Early the next morning, Melissa slipped into her cubicle at CSD with heavy eyelids. She turned on her computer and was immediately greeted by urgent emails. The client's demands were piling up: new daily quotas, more specialized packaging, even stricter delivery windows. It seemed that every time they inched closer to meeting their expectations, the bar was raised yet again. Sighing, she massaged her temples. She'd barely slept after Mr. Phillips' visit. Now she faced another wave of pressure, and her mental reserves felt dangerously low. Cheryl, seated nearby, gave her a sympathetic glance. "Rough night?" she asked softly. "You have no idea," Melissa murmured, forcing a weak smile. "We're so close to proving ourselves to this client, but it's never enough. And meanwhile, my landlord's breathing down my neck." Cheryl's expression shifted with understanding. "I'm sorry. If there's anything I can do—" "Thank you, really," Melissa said, shaking her head. "I have to handle this myself. Maybe I'll ask for an advance." "It's a long shot, but if I can show them how crucial it is—" Her voice trailed off, uncertain of how such a request would be received by the higher-ups, especially someone like Marcus. Before Cheryl could respond, Martin's voice rang out from down the hall. "Melissa, staff meeting in the conference room. Now." Melissa hastened to grab a notepad, ignoring the flutter of anxiety in her stomach. She followed Cheryl and a handful of co-workers into the room. Anna was already there, scrolling through her phone with a taut jaw. Marcus stood at the head of the table, arms folded, a frown etched into his features. Beside him, Melissa caught sight of a figure she hadn't seen in person until now. Jeremy Cooper. Her heart skipped a beat. He was every bit as composed as he had been on the subway, wearing a well-fitted blazer, his green eyes reflecting focus. Despite the tension in the room, he offered a polite nod when their eyes met, a flicker of recognition passing between them. Melissa quickly looked away, trying to steady her breathing. Marcus cleared his throat. "All right, team. This has escalated. Our big client is demanding further proof that we can handle consistent volume without delays. They've hinted at pulling out unless we guarantee same-day delivery for certain batches." Murmurs of disbelief spread around the table. Even Anna looked taken aback. "Same day? That's a tall order, especially for outer boroughs." "That's what they want," Jeremy said, his tone calm but resolute. "And if we can't deliver, literally and figuratively, they'll walk. We stand to lose not just their business, but also the potential investors who see this account as a litmus test." Melissa swallowed hard. The conversation felt surreal. Here she was, in a meeting with the man who'd once offered her an empathetic shoulder on a late-night train. He was speaking about massive stakes, and she was expected to help find solutions. She forced her thoughts back to the discussion. Martin stepped forward, gesturing at a map pinned on the wall. "We've already pushed our drivers to the limit. Overtime is skyrocketing. Recruitment is slow. I'm not sure how we can promise same-day coverage city-wide." Silence hung in the air. Melissa glanced at Jeremy, noticing a flicker of worry behind his composed facade. He exhaled slowly. "We need fresh ideas, something that aligns with our mission but meets this demand." Feeling a wave of boldness, Melissa spoke up. "What if we expanded the micro-hub concept? Place small distribution points in strategic neighborhoods. Drivers wouldn't have to return to a central depot between runs." Jeremy's gaze landed on her. "Micro-hubs? That's interesting." Marcus's expression remained cautious. "We'd need space, which costs money, and staff to run each hub." Melissa nodded. "Sure, but maybe we can partner with local businesses. Cafes or community centers that close early. We offer them a rental fee or revenue share in exchange for using a backroom or storage area as a mini-hub during certain hours. It's cheaper than renting or buying new warehouses." A tense moment followed as everyone digested the idea. Jeremy tapped a pen against the conference table. "We can't set that up overnight, but if we can show the client that we're working on a scalable solution, maybe they'll give us a grace period." Marcus looked at Melissa more intently than before. "It's worth exploring, but we'd need a pilot location ASAP." Anna nodded, flicking through her phone. "I'll start reaching out to potential local partners. Maybe some of our community contacts can help." Jeremy offered a tight-lipped smile to the room. "All right, let's proceed. We'll reconvene in a day to see what's feasible." Meeting adjourned, he turned to Melissa, extending his hand. "I don't think we've been properly introduced. Jeremy Cooper." She felt a flush creep up her neck. "Melissa Roberts," she replied, shaking his hand. "Good to finally meet you in an official capacity." A knowing light danced in his eyes. "Likewise. Thanks for speaking up." As he moved on to speak with Marcus, Melissa quietly left the room, heart thumping. She had watched him slip back into business mode with remarkable ease, as though their subway encounter had been a separate lifetime. She remembered the gentleness in his voice that night, the empathy he'd shown. Yet here, in the office environment, he was the founder, the decision-maker, and she was just an employee. Stepping back into the hallway, she replayed every moment of the meeting, including the subtle shift in Jeremy's expression when he recognized her. Now she also had a bigger puzzle to solve: how to help CSD pull off a near miracle with these same-day deliveries, all while wrestling her own fears about eviction and finances. She was caught in a vice of professional and personal pressures, uncertain if she could keep it all from crushing her. Over the next 48 hours, the micro-hub concept took shape with astonishing speed. Anna tapped into her network of local non-profits, while Martin oversaw logistical details for storing packages securely. Candice organized a communication plan for customers. Marcus haggled with finance teams to free up a modest budget, enough to cover pilot costs. And Jeremy, when he was in the office, provided overall direction, occasionally stopping by to check on progress. Melissa found herself at the center of many discussions, mapping out which neighborhoods might benefit most from a temporary hub. She also coordinated closely with Cheryl, who tracked expenses, and Kevin, who provided technical adjustments to the routing software. The entire office buzzed with a sense of urgency, but also a flicker of optimism, as if they'd found a potential lifeline. Amid this whirlwind, Melissa managed to speak privately with Anna. They met in Anna's office, where large windows looked out on a drizzling afternoon. Feeling her pulse quicken, Melissa explained the trouble she faced with rent and the looming eviction. "I wouldn't normally ask," she said, her voice trembling. "But is there any company policy regarding salary advances? I just need to cover this last shortfall so I can stabilize my living situation." Anna's face softened. "I'm sorry you're dealing with that. Our policy typically doesn't allow large advances, but I'll talk to Marcus. We'll see if there's any flexibility. You're a valuable part of the team." Relief fluttered in Melissa's chest. "Thank you. I appreciate any help." Anna patted her hand reassuringly before stepping out to another meeting. A glimmer of hope emerged in Melissa's mind. Perhaps she'd soon break free from that suffocating sense of panic about losing her home. By the time Thursday evening arrived, they had identified 2 potential micro-hub locations, a community center near Midtown and a small organic market in Brooklyn. Anna secured verbal agreements, and Martin began dispatching drivers for test runs. Things were running surprisingly smoothly, so much so that Candice started drafting an email pitch to the big client, outlining how these hubs would guarantee faster, more efficient deliveries. Despite her exhaustion, Melissa found satisfaction in seeing her ideas materialize. She even took a moment to update Alicia, her old co-worker from the diner, via a quick text, letting her know that life was hectic but promising. Alicia replied with celebratory emojis, reminding Melissa she still had friends rooting for her success. However, the next morning dealt a harsh blow. Melissa arrived at her desk to find an email from Marcus, curtly stating that a salary advance was not permissible per company policy. Her stomach dropped. So that was that. No special considerations would be made. The email concluded by expressing hope that she would find a satisfactory resolution to her personal situation. Slumping in her chair, she squeezed her eyes shut for a moment. She'd pinned her hopes on that advance. Instead, she was back to square one. The new job paid better than waitressing, but the backlog of debt wouldn't magically dissolve. She pressed her lips together, fighting the urge to cry. Cheryl, noticing her somber expression, approached cautiously. "Bad news?" Cheryl asked in a low voice. Melissa nodded, opening the email so Cheryl could skim it. A sympathetic frown appeared on her co-worker's face. "I'm so sorry." Marcus can be pretty rigid, especially when it comes to finances. Melissa shrugged, trying to maintain composure. "He's just doing his job. I'll figure something else out." She forced a small, shaky smile. "Thank you for caring." They were interrupted by Martin, who rushed over with a concerned look. "We need you in the meeting room. The client's sending a representative to check out the micro-hub concept in person. We have to be ready." Melissa inhaled, pushing her personal crisis aside. She couldn't let the rest of the team down. "Right, let's do this." They assembled in the conference room, finalizing the details for the client visit. Jeremy stood at the front, discussing how to showcase the route efficiency. With every sentence, he radiated calm leadership, occasionally glancing in Melissa's direction as if silently thanking her for the idea. She found it both encouraging and bittersweet. Here they were, side by side in a professional sense, while her private world teetered on the edge. An hour later, the client representative arrived, a tall, sharp-eyed woman named Danielle. She scrutinized the route plans, asked pointed questions about time estimates, and insisted on thorough data. Martin presented charts, while Candice laid out marketing angles. Melissa explained how grouping deliveries by neighborhoods could reduce delays and carbon footprint simultaneously. Danielle jotted notes, occasionally raising an eyebrow. Her neutral expression made it impossible to gauge her reaction. After the presentation, she made a polite exit, saying she would relay her findings to her superiors. The moment she was gone, the team let out a collective sigh. It was out of their hands now. With tension still coiled in the room, Jeremy thanked everyone for their hard work, then pulled Melissa aside. "That was impressive," he said, keeping his voice low. "Your micro-hub concept seems to be the backbone of this entire pitch." Melissa shifted her weight, remembering her situation at home. "Glad I could help." He studied her for a moment, his green eyes clouded with concern. "You look worried. Everything okay?" She hesitated. She barely knew him beyond the brief encounter on the subway and the professional setting here, confessing her financial plight felt risky. "Just personal stuff," she said softly. Jeremy nodded, not pressing for details. "Well, if you ever need to talk, I'm here. I mean that." She mustered a slight smile, torn between gratitude and the reminder that he was essentially her boss, albeit a uniquely kind one. "Thank you." He offered a final nod before stepping out. Left alone in the conference room, Melissa leaned against the wall, letting the swirl of emotions settle. They had a small victory, having piqued the client's interest in the micro-hubs. Yet reality nipped at her heels. No salary advance, no guaranteed solution for rent, and a clock ticking ever closer to eviction. She reminded herself that she'd survived plenty of storms before. This one might just demand every ounce of grit she possessed. For now, she would cling to the small win at work and hold on to the promise, however faint, that something might shift in her favor. The following week began with the entire office holding its breath, awaiting the client's decision. Days passed without definitive feedback, sending tension skyrocketing. The micro-hubs stood ready, half-staffed by newly trained drivers. Melissa oscillated between revising route schedules and obsessively refreshing her inbox. Each morning, she prayed to find a message proclaiming they'd landed the final green light. On a crisp Wednesday afternoon, she finally saw an email marked "Confidential" from the client's representative. Heart pounding, she opened it. A wide grin spread across her face. They were tentatively approving the pilot program, contingent on a successful 2-week test run. If CSD delivered on time, every time, the contract would be renewed long-term. Without pausing to think, she jumped from her chair and let out a small, joyful squeak. Cheryl, who was passing by, stopped short. "What happened?" Melissa beckoned her over, waving at the screen. "They said yes, 2-week pilot trial to prove ourselves. If we nail it, we lock in the contract." Cheryl's eyes lit up. She pulled Melissa into a quick hug. "We did it. Well, you did it. You and your micro-hubs." Others in the office soon caught the news, and a ripple of excitement passed through each department. Martin rushed to confirm the logistics, Candice started drafting a public announcement, and Anna dashed off to share the good tidings with Jeremy and Marcus. This victory, however conditional, felt like a godsend for CSD, a beacon of possibility. Moments later, Jeremy appeared with Anna in tow, both beaming. He extended a hand to Melissa. "Congratulations, this wouldn't have been possible without your idea. Now we just have to prove we can keep our word." Her chest swelled with pride. "Thank you for trusting me. I'll do everything I can to make sure we succeed." Anna clapped her hands. We should celebrate, maybe after we're sure we can handle the demand, she teased. Then she winked at Melissa. And we will handle it. As the group dispersed to continue preparations, Melissa felt a renewed sense of purpose. The pressure was still immense, but at least now it carried the promise of success rather than the specter of defeat. The deal, if finalized, could open doors not just for the company, but potentially for her own career growth. Perhaps she'd finally have the financial freedom to settle her debts and find a stable home for Ivy. Yet the day had more twists in store. Around lunchtime, she received a text from Mr. Phillips, the landlord. Need an update today, or I'll have to start eviction proceedings. The bluntness of it made her stomach churn. She'd hoped for more time, or at least a stroke of luck in the form of an advance. Nothing had changed on that front. Swallowing her fear, she decided to text back. I just need a little more time. I can pay a larger portion by next Friday. It was a gamble, considering her savings were meager and the cost of living in Brooklyn kept rising. But she'd have her paycheck soon. Maybe some overtime pay, too. If the pilot project's success led to a raise or bonus, she could fully clear the arrears. She rose from her chair, smoothing down her skirt, and walked to Anna's office. She explained her situation again, this time mentioning that Mr. Phillips was about to move forward with eviction. I know Marcus said no to the advance, she added softly, but is there any chance for overtime or a short-term loan through the company? Anna's expression was filled with empathy, but her words were careful. I'm afraid Marcus is strict about those policies. We do have a small hardship fund for emergencies, but it's usually reserved for medical crises. She exhaled, tapping her pen. Let me see what I can do, but I can't promise anything, Melissa nodded, biting back her disappointment. The clock was ticking, but at least the company was on the brink of a major breakthrough. If she could hang on, perhaps she'd find a permanent solution. That evening, after finishing her tasks, she lingered at her cubicle. Jeremy was in the open concept area, discussing some strategy with Martin. Once he finished, he caught her eye and offered a polite wave. She took a moment to steel her nerves, then approached him, aware that each step made her heart pound a little faster. Got a minute? She asked quietly. Of course. He stepped aside with her, away from the flurry of activity. What's on your mind? Melissa hesitated, scanning his face. It was so easy to recall how gentle he'd been that night on the subway, how he'd let her sleep on his shoulder without a word of complaint. But now, in this professional setting, the dynamic felt complicated. I just wanted to thank you for giving me a chance here. I know I was hired through the regular channels, but still, it changed my life. Jeremy's expression softened. I'm glad. You've given a lot back to us, too. They stood there a moment, an unspoken warmth passing between them. Melissa forced herself to speak. We'll get through this pilot. I promise I won't let you down. He nodded, a flicker of encouragement in his eyes. I know. She left the office with her spirits somewhat lifted. The next phase of her journey still held peril, eviction looming, money tight. But she also sensed a new tide carrying her forward. The pilot project, the chance to prove herself, and the subtle connection with Jeremy all wove together into a fragile hope. If she could just keep her balance a little longer, maybe that hope would transform into something tangible, both for her family's future and for the quiet possibility of more than a professional bond. Melissa arrived at the office before sunrise, the sky still tinted with shades of pink and orange. She was determined to make the most of the 2-week pilot program that would determine Cooper Sustainable Delivery's future with their massive new client. Each day brought a new round of challenges, reassignments, urgent requests, and the constant possibility of failure. Yet morale had never felt higher. The The team seemed to share a sense of collective purpose, fueled by the knowledge that the stakes were enormous. As she walked in, her co-worker Kevin greeted her in a hushed tone. "Heads up," he whispered, pointing toward the large, glass-walled conference room at the end of the hallway. "Danielle from the client's side is back. She's early." Melissa's pulse kicked up. Danielle, the same sharp-eyed representative who had visited once before, was notorious for her strict standards. Melissa took a breath to steady herself and headed that way. She found Danielle seated at the conference table, laptop open, reviewing fresh reports from the micro-hubs. Martin stood beside her with arms folded, wearing a serious expression. Danielle acknowledged Melissa with a brief nod. "Good morning." Her tone gave nothing away. "I'm here unannounced because I want real-time data, not a curated slideshow." Martin introduced Melissa formally, highlighting her role in designing the micro-hub strategy. Danielle flicked her gaze over, then tapped her screen. "The numbers look promising, but I want to see how you're handling unexpected surges. You have packages this morning that weren't listed until late last night. Do you have a plan for those?" Melissa glanced at Martin, who motioned for her to explain. "Yes," she began, leaning in to see Danielle's laptop. "We received an after-hours shipment request for about 80 additional packages in Midtown. We rerouted drivers from the lower Manhattan zone using the new micro-hub near Union Square to stage deliveries more efficiently. The time windows haven't changed, so we're still on track." Danielle's brow furrowed as she scrolled through the data. "And you're confident you won't overextend your drivers?" "It's tight," Melissa admitted, "but we've built buffer times. If we see a high likelihood of delays, we can shift deliveries to the Brooklyn micro-hub. That's one advantage of having multiple staging points." Danielle's lips pressed into a thin line, an expression that could either mean skepticism or concentration. Finally, she nodded. "I'd like to visit the Union Square hub this afternoon." Unannounced, of course. Martin's eyes widened slightly, but he quickly agreed. "Sure, we can arrange for someone from our side to meet you there." Danielle glanced at Melissa. "I assume you know it best." Melissa felt her stomach twist at the unexpected summons. "Yes, of course," she replied. "I'll be happy to show you around." Once Danielle left to make calls in a smaller break room, Martin turned to Melissa with a mixture of relief and concern. "You can handle this, right? She's tough, but if our hub is running smoothly, this could really solidify her confidence in us." Melissa nodded, though her mind raced with logistical questions. "I'll do everything I can. The hub team's been great so far." She tried to project optimism, but she couldn't ignore the knot in her chest. Danielle's scrutiny was relentless. Later that day, Melissa found herself riding in one of the company's hybrid vans with Candice, who insisted on tagging along to help manage any PR angles. A short drive brought them to the Union Square hub, set up in the back storage area of a community center. It was an unglamorous space lined with metal shelves crammed with packages, but it served its purpose well. They stepped out onto the sidewalk just as Danielle's car pulled up. She emerged, laptop bag in hand, surveying the surroundings with a critical eye. Melissa plastered on a polite smile, leading her inside. The hum of activity was immediate, drivers scanning barcodes, a small computer station for updates, and volunteers from the community center offering direction to customers who came to pick up parcels in person. "This is our staging area for Midtown deliveries," Melissa explained. "We have 2 main drivers assigned here during peak hours, but we can call in more if traffic in the main depot spikes. It allows us to shorten routes significantly." Danielle walked around slowly, watching a driver print out a fresh batch of shipping labels. She peppered him with questions about route times and traffic patterns. The driver stumbled a bit, not used to speaking with a corporate representative, but Melissa stepped in smoothly, clarifying any confusion. Candice hovered nearby, snapping photos for a potential social media post. Danielle noticed. "I'd prefer you hold off on any public-facing materials until this pilot ends," she said curtly. Candice nodded, embarrassed. Of course. After inspecting the shelves and cross-checking a few packages against the digital tracker, Danielle turned her attention back to Melissa. "Everything appears orderly, but I'll be reviewing real-time updates. If there are any delays today, I'll know." "We'll do our best to avoid them," Melissa replied. Though her heart pounded, she maintained a calm exterior. "Please let me know if you have any questions during the day. I'll be on call." Danielle gave a curt nod. "I will." By late afternoon, the drivers had departed for the final delivery runs. Melissa watched them go, exhaling with a mixture of tension and hope. So far, there were no significant delays, and their software indicated that travel times through Midtown were lighter than expected. Maybe fate was on their side for once. Candice patted her shoulder. "Nice job. She's a little intense, but you handled it." Melissa nodded, absorbing the relief of having survived Danielle's impromptu inspection. Still, she knew a single day of smooth operations wouldn't seal the deal. The next week and a half of this pilot could be equally daunting. And just outside that professional triumph lurked the reality of her landlord's ultimatum. While they packed up, she checked her phone. No messages from Rebecca or Mr. Phillips yet. That was both a relief and a concern. For the moment, she pushed away her personal worries, focusing on the fact that the system she'd helped build was holding up under pressure. If Danielle's demands were being met, maybe, just maybe, the biggest hurdle for CSD would soon be behind them. The next morning brought a swirl of conflicting emotions. Melissa had stayed up late reviewing the route data. Every chart and table burned into her mind. The initial results from Danielle's visit were promising, no major delays reported, and a nominal reduction in carbon emissions compared to the old model. She should have felt buoyed by this small but significant victory, yet the personal crisis of eviction still hovered. She slipped into the office early again, scanning her inbox. Half a dozen new emails from Danielle awaited her, each one requesting more data, corridor-by-corridor breakdowns, proof of timely arrivals, and even driver testimonials. Melissa fired off responses as quickly as she could, heart-pounding. This sort of pressure was relentless, but it also felt like a chance to prove the value of her ideas. A soft knock on her cubicle wall made her jump. Jeremy stood there, hands in his pockets. "Got a second?" he asked, voice gentle. Melissa nodded, glancing around. The office was quiet at this hour, most staff not yet at their desks. "Sure. Everything all right?" He motioned for her to follow him to a nearby conference room. Once inside, he closed the door partway and turned to face her. "Anna mentioned you're dealing with some tough personal circumstances." His tone was sympathetic, but not pitying. "I wanted you to know that if there's anything I can do, I'm all ears. We have a policy about advances, but maybe we can look at other options." Heat rose to her cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and gratitude. "I appreciate that, but I know the rules. Marcus already turned me down for an advance. It's his call, right?" Jeremy's brows furrowed. "Marcus does handle finances, but I still have final say in certain areas, especially for employee welfare. I just need to know the specifics." "I don't mean to pry, but how serious is it?" She hesitated, then let out a shaky breath. "I have an eviction notice. If I don't come up with the overdue rent soon, my daughter and I—" Her voice caught. "We might lose our apartment." His eyes softened. "I'm so sorry. That's a lot to carry on top of everything at work." Melissa managed a small, rueful laugh. "Yeah, well, I'm used to juggling." For a moment, he seemed to weigh his words carefully. "Look, We can't make decisions overnight, but I can talk to Marcus again. Sometimes the company can offer a short-term loan under certain circumstances, medical emergencies, housing crises, that kind of thing. I'll do what I can. In the meantime, let's keep focusing on nailing this pilot. If it goes well, maybe we'll have more flexibility in our budget. Melissa felt an unexpected rush of relief, though she tried to temper it with caution. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Really?" Jeremy nodded, giving her shoulder a light squeeze before stepping out. She stood there, staring at the half-open door, stunned by his willingness to help. A glimmer of hope stirred, but she also feared the potential complications. The line between personal and professional felt dangerously thin. Back at her cubicle, she immersed herself in the day's tasks. Danielle continued to send demands for more granular data, wanting to see the exact transit times between each hub and the central depot. Cheryl jumped in to help refine the spreadsheets, while Kevin ran simulations to confirm no major traffic hazards were on the horizon. Even so, the workload bore down on Melissa like a physical weight. By midday, the pilot program was running smoothly for the second day in a row. Drivers checked in with fewer complaints than expected. Some were even enthusiastic about the micro-hubs, finding them more convenient than shuttling back and forth to the main office. Anna and Martin bustled around, praising the quick adaptation. In the middle of all this semi-controlled chaos, Mr. Phillips's name flashed on Melissa's phone. She swallowed, stepping away from her desk to answer. "Hello?" His tone was clipped. "I saw your text. You said you'd have a payment plan by today. Do you?" Melissa's stomach twisted. "I'm working on it. My job situation has improved, but I need just a little more time, maybe another week or two." He snorted. "Another week or two? This is business, Melissa. I can't keep you in there for free." She pressed her lips together, searching for calm. "I can give you something next Friday, and the rest soon after. It's the best I can do. I promise you'll get what I owe. I just—" Her words faltered. A tense silence stretched. Finally, Mr. Phillips sighed. "Fine, but that's it. If you don't pay by then, I'll move forward with a formal eviction. Understand?" She murmured her thanks and hung up, heart drumming. Next Friday was only a handful of days away. If Jeremy couldn't persuade Marcus to approve some form of loan, she'd be out of options. The rest of the day passed in a haze. She answered Danielle's emails, directed drivers, and fielded last-minute schedule changes. By the time evening arrived, she was drained to the core, yet she forced herself to stay, triple-checking reports for the next morning. The sense of responsibility was overwhelming. Letting down the company now, in the midst of the pilot, felt unthinkable. As she finally left the building, she recalled Jeremy's earnest promise to see what he could do. A small part of her worried about becoming the charity case in his eyes. Yet a larger part clung to the hope that, for once, she wasn't alone in facing the weight of her burdens. Melissa's alarm buzzed at 5 a.m. on Friday, dragging her from restless sleep. She had gone to bed past midnight after wrestling with more spreadsheets and route forecasts. The tension in her muscles reminded her there were only 7 days left before her landlord's final deadline. She wished she could freeze time, just long enough to solve everything at once. She tiptoed past Ivy's small bedroom, noticing the child slept with her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched tightly. Melissa's heart squeezed at the thought of uprooting Ivy if eviction happened. Shaking the image from her mind, she dressed quickly in comfortable office wear and headed for the train. Upon arriving at the office, she saw Martin already hunched over the big whiteboard in the main workspace, scribbling driver schedules. "We've got a problem," he said as soon as she approached. Melissa braced herself. "What's happening?" He pointed to a cluster of routes on the board, mostly in downtown Manhattan. 3 of our drivers have an emergency, family issue. They can't come in. We can't reassign them easily because we're at capacity elsewhere." She leaned in, scanning the color-coded lines. "Maybe we can shift packages to the Brooklyn micro hub, but that puts extra strain on those drivers," she said, doing quick mental math. "Not to mention, Danielle is checking in this afternoon. If we fall behind, she'll see it in real time," Martin replied, exhaustion lining his eyes. Without hesitation, Melissa volunteered a plan. "Let's pull in any part-timers we have, even if they're not fully up to speed. I can go over the routes with them manually for the morning shift. Maybe we'll keep the schedules from falling apart." He nodded grimly, passing her a roster. "We need to finalize this ASAP." The morning whirled by in a blur of frantic calls, training and last-second changes. The tension in the air was palpable. Cheryl handled finance questions from new drivers about their part-time pay. Kevin tried to adjust the software on the fly, but the system kept throwing error codes due to so many manual overrides. Melissa toggled between screens and phone calls, feeling like she was juggling flaming torches. By midday, the onslaught of tasks continued. Danielle's emails and phone calls came in like clockwork, each time demanding updates on how the day's deliveries were faring. Candice texted Melissa that the client's PR team was sniffing around for reassurance. Apparently, an online rumor suggested the pilot might be collapsing under the surge. Melissa felt a pinch of panic. One misstep, and the partnership might unravel. As if the pressure weren't enough, a calendar alert on Melissa's phone reminded her she had to meet Ivy's teacher in the evening for a brief parent-teacher conference. She'd promised Ivy she would attend. Guilt gnawed at her as she realized she couldn't back out, even though the crisis at work demanded every ounce of her time. She left Martin and Cheryl with instructions for the last batch of schedules and bolted out the door, promising to check back in once she finished at the school. Arriving at Ivy's elementary campus, she rushed down the brightly colored hallway toward the classroom. Ivy spotted her and ran up with a grin, but Melissa could tell her daughter sensed the stress. She tried to smile and focus, listening as the teacher praised Ivy's enthusiasm for reading, but noted she sometimes seemed anxious when asked about home life. Melissa's cheeks warmed. "We've had a hectic schedule lately," she said, pushing her hair back. "I'll make sure to give her more reassurance." The teacher nodded kindly. "She's a bright girl, Mrs. Roberts. She just needs to feel secure. I hope everything's all right at home." Melissa offered a tight smile, unable to form a proper answer. Minutes later, she and Ivy were outside in the crisp evening air. Ivy tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Can we get ice cream?" Melissa hesitated. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from work. But when she saw the hopeful light in Ivy's eyes, she couldn't say no. They walked to a small shop around the corner, Ivy chattering excitedly about her classmates. For a few precious minutes, Melissa allowed herself to enjoy the simple act of sharing a chocolate cone with her daughter, the sweet treat melting faster than they could eat it. Suddenly, her phone vibrated again, and she stepped away to glance at the screen. It was a frantic message from Cheryl. "System meltdown. We lost track of 6 deliveries, and Danielle's flipping out. Martin can't fix it alone. Please help." Her stomach dropped. "Ivy, honey, I have to go back to the office," she said apologetically. Ivy's face fell, though she nodded bravely. "Okay, I'll be good at home." Melissa felt her heart twist. This was the exact situation the teacher alluded to, her child learning to accept disappointment as normal. She hurried Ivy home and, with Rebecca's help, dashed back to CSD. The office was in chaos. Kevin typed frantically, trying to recover lost delivery data. Martin fielded an angry phone call, likely from Danielle, while Cheryl scanned paper logs for any clue about the missing packages. Melissa plunged in, scanning driver check-in sheets and contacting each one. Tension soared. By the time they located the glitch, hours had passed. Danielle had left them a string of sternly worded emails. Melissa's hands shook as she typed replies, explaining the snafu and assuring the client that the deliveries were still on their way. She wondered if this slip might undo the goodwill they'd cultivated over the past few days. Sometime after midnight, the system finally stabilized. Worn out and frazzled, the team slumped in their chairs. The meltdown was contained, but the question remained. Would the client see it as a minor hiccup or a reason to pull the plug? And how much longer could Melissa keep balancing these demands before something else gave way? Exhausted, she powered down her computer, the weight of the day pressing on her chest. She thought of Ivy, who had gone to bed without her again. She pictured her landlord's looming deadline. Closing her eyes for a moment, she whispered a silent plea that somewhere in this storm of responsibilities, a path forward would reveal itself. Come Monday morning, the air felt thick with apprehension at Cooper Sustainable Deliveries. Over the weekend, Danielle had sent a measured but stern email regarding the system crash and the lost deliveries. She acknowledged that CSD recovered quickly, but warned that another misstep might end this pilot entirely. Everyone felt the weight of that ultimatum. Melissa sat at her desk, scanning the updated route plans with bleary eyes. She hadn't slept well, plagued by nightmares of eviction notices taped to her door. The thought of letting her daughter down gnawed at her, fueling an almost desperate desire to make things work. Martin called an impromptu meeting with the core logistics team, plus Cheryl, Candice, and Kevin. Anna joined soon after, with Jeremy trailing behind. They gathered around the long conference table, laptops glowing and coffee cups steaming. Martin looked haggard. "We need a foolproof strategy for the rest of this pilot. That meltdown nearly sank us. I want ideas on how to prevent a repeat." Candice tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Could we build a backup system that syncs in real time, so if one set of data fails, the other retains the information?" Kevin frowned. "We're running on a tight budget. Real-time backups are not cheap." Cheryl chimed in. "There might be a partial solution. If we can't afford full redundancy, we can at least store incremental data offline every hour, so we don't lose an entire day's worth of deliveries in one go." Martin nodded. "That's a start. What else?" Melissa hesitated, then spoke up. "We're also depending too heavily on technology. We should keep a simpler, manual log of each package. It's not glamorous, but if the system crashes, we can trace the paper trail. It saved us last time, but we need a better process. Maybe scanning shipments in and out of the micro-hubs with a handheld device that also logs data on paper." Anna gave an approving smile. "It's old school, but effective." Jeremy leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Let's do it. We'll develop a short-term backup plan. Even if it's a bit manual, it's worth it for peace of mind. And Kevin, see if you can negotiate a small-scale backup system with our tech providers. It doesn't have to be perfect, just enough to reassure the client we're not going to lose track of deliveries again." The group discussed details for nearly an hour, hashing out responsibilities. Jeremy offered to speak personally with Danielle, hoping to ease her concerns. Martin and Kevin split tasks for the data backups, while Cheryl and Melissa would oversee manual logs in each micro-hub. Candice drafted a memo to the entire staff detailing new procedures. Once the meeting ended, people drifted back to their stations. Melissa lingered, stacking papers and glancing at Jeremy. He caught her eye and offered a faint smile, then stepped closer. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. She gave a half shrug. "I'm still here, that's something." He lowered his voice. "I spoke with Marcus again about your situation. He's standing firm about no advances, but—" Melissa's heart sank. "I figured. He's not one to budge. Jeremy glanced around, ensuring no one was within earshot. "I do have some discretionary authority for employee emergencies. Let me see if there's another option. I don't want you to lose your home." A mixture of relief and embarrassment washed over her. "I appreciate it, but I also understand if it's not possible. The last thing I want is special treatment." His gaze was kind but resolute. "It's not special treatment. Plenty of companies have hardship funds or short-term loans. This is about helping a valuable employee through a tough time." He paused. "You deserve that much." A swirl of emotions rose in Melissa's chest, but she nodded, too choked up to form a proper response. He gave her a gentle squeeze on the shoulder and left. She stood alone at the corner of the conference table, inhaling shakily. If he could find a way around Marcus's rigid stance, she might just have a fighting chance to keep Ivy safe and secure. Work resumed at a furious pace. Melissa juggled the creation of manual logs with the usual scheduling chaos. Cheryl teased her about needing roller skates as she hustled between the micro-hub teams and her cubicle, but it was all in good humor. She felt a renewed sense of resolve. If the pilot succeeded, it wouldn't just save CSD's contract, it might also salvage her future at home. That evening, as she powered down her computer, she realized she hadn't spoken to Mr. Phillips all day. The silence was unnerving. Perhaps he was preparing the paperwork for eviction, or maybe he was waiting to see if she could pay on time. Either way, she couldn't delay. If Jeremy's efforts to secure a company-backed loan didn't pan out soon, she'd have to scramble for another lifeline. Stepping into the crisp fall air outside the office, she noticed the skyline tinted with the last glow of sunset. She thought of Ivy. How excited her daughter would be if they could simply continue living in the small but familiar apartment. She allowed herself one moment of hope, no matter how precarious. Then she braced for another day of make-or-break tension, determined to see it through for Ivy's sake and maybe for her own sense of pride. The final 3 days of the pilot arrived with a sense of both urgency and expectancy. By now, the entire CSD staff knew what was at stake, and each person seemed determined to prove their worth. The micro-hubs buzzed with disciplined efficiency. Martin and Kevin stayed late every night, double-checking the new data backups. Cheryl coordinated finances and payroll while also helping Candace finalize a public-facing success report, just in case they could announce victory soon. Melissa awoke on a brisk Wednesday morning, the second to last day of the pilot, with her heart pounding. She'd barely slept. The dread of her landlord's deadline loomed like a dark cloud. The money simply wasn't there yet. Unless Jeremy pulled off a miracle, she saw no way to prevent Mr. Phillips from serving eviction papers. She raked her fingers through her hair, telling herself that despair wouldn't help. She had to keep pushing forward. At the office, Danielle arrived unannounced once more, stepping into the open workspace with her usual air of cool scrutiny. She requested a status update from each department, scribbling notes in a leather-bound planner. Melissa observed from her cubicle, wondering which detail might sway Danielle's final verdict. Every time the representative nodded curtly, the entire room seemed to exhale in relief. After lunch, Melissa hurried to the break room for a quick coffee. There, she found Jeremy leaning against the counter, stirring creamer into a mug. He offered a small, weary smile. "You're doing great," he said softly. She took a paper cup, filling it halfway. "Let's see if Danielle agrees. She looks ready to pounce on any sign of weakness." He rubbed the back of his neck. "She's tough, but she's fair. If we deliver what we promised, we'll come out on top." Before Melissa could ask about the potential hardship loan, Marcus strolled in, wearing his usual serious expression. Jeremy turned to greet him, and any chance for a private conversation evaporated. Marcus gave a curt nod, then addressed Melissa. "Cheryl mentioned you're finalizing the route logs." She nodded. "Yes, Everything's updated and cross-checked. I'll email you a summary by the end of the day." Marcus studied her for a moment, as if weighing whether to say more. Then he simply stated, "Keep it thorough," and walked out. Melissa tried to read some glimmer of concession in his eyes, but he kept his emotions guarded. The final hours of that day felt like a battlefield. Minor hiccups popped up. A driver got stuck in a minor fender bender. An unexpectedly large batch of packages arrived at the Brooklyn micro hub, and Danielle demanded to see detailed timestamps for every delivery route. Melissa, fueled by caffeine and sheer willpower, tackled each problem head-on. She stayed well past sunset, capturing every detail in the updated spreadsheets. Late at night, after sending her final email to Marcus and Danielle, she slumped back in her chair. Her phone's screen showed no new texts from Mr. Phillips or Jeremy. She dreaded returning to her apartment, yet it was the only place Ivy knew as home. Gathering her things, she mentally braced for the next day, the last stretch of the pilot, the day that could decide everything. Sure enough, the next morning dawned crisp and clear, as if New York itself held its breath. Melissa arrived to find an email from Danielle. "I will collect final data today and present it to our board tomorrow. If the numbers hold, you can expect our decision soon." The short message carried enormous weight. By midday, a hush fell over the office. The drivers executed their routes smoothly, no major delays. Martin reported minimal errors in the tracking software. Anna quietly checked on everyone, offering encouraging words. Candice finished drafting an internal success story memo, ready to send out if the pilot ended without a hitch. Melissa spent much of the day at the Brooklyn micro hub, ensuring the manual logs stayed accurate. A cold wind whipped through the loading area, and she tucked her coat tighter around herself, scanning barcodes alongside the part-time drivers. One of them, a middle-aged woman named Lorraine, mentioned how grateful she was for the chance to work flexible hours. "This micro-hub idea is genius," she said with a grin. "I get to make deliveries without crossing half the city." Melissa smiled, touched by the comment. She remembered the countless nights she'd spent dreaming up solutions while working at the diner, never imagining she'd be implementing them in a company that took her seriously. Yet, even in this moment of accomplishment, she couldn't fully relax. She dreaded the next time her phone would ring or buzz, fearing it might be news that she and Ivy had run out of time. By the late afternoon, the final shipments were dispatched. Melissa hovered by the hub's makeshift office, refreshing the tracker to confirm each driver's status. As the last delivered notification pinged on her screen, she let out a shaky exhale. They had done all they could. The pilot's official end arrived with neither fanfare nor meltdown, just a collective exhaustion and relief. Returning to the main office, she found the team gathered in a subdued celebration. Candy wrappers and half-finished cups of coffee littered the conference table. Anna offered tired smiles, and Cheryl gave Melissa a grateful hug. Martin shook his head in disbelief, whispering, "We actually did it." Yet amidst the soft cheers, Melissa's gaze drifted to Jeremy and Marcus, talking in low voices. Jeremy appeared calm but firm, as though making a case for something. She suspected it had to do with her. Nerves twisted in her stomach. The next few days would reveal not only whether the client would stay, but also if she'd managed to keep her apartment. She desperately hoped her small, personal miracle might align with the company's big victory. When Jeremy eventually glanced her way and offered a nearly imperceptible nod, Melissa let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, help was on the horizon. For now, though, all she could do was wait. Melissa woke before her alarm, her heart a riot of hope and dread. The pilot project had concluded with fewer mishaps than she'd feared, but now came the waiting. Danielle would take the data to her superiors, who would decide whether to finalize a lucrative contract with Cooper Sustainable Deliveries or walk away. That decision held massive implications for the company and for Melissa's livelihood. She glanced around her apartment, the old wooden floors and chipped paint reflecting the meager light of dawn. Ivy was still asleep, a small lump under a worn pink quilt in the next room. Melissa felt the familiar wave of anxiety. Her rent was overdue, and the landlord's deadline was in just a few days. Unless something changed drastically, an eviction notice would soon grace her door. With a sigh, she showered and dressed, slipping into a simple blouse and slacks. On her way out, she paused to tuck a note into Ivy's lunchbox. "You're my sunshine. Love you, Mom." The little gestures were all she could do to reassure her daughter, who had sensed the undercurrent of tension at home. At the office, the atmosphere buzzed with hushed anticipation. People drifted in quietly, some clutching coffee cups, others scrolling their phones for any sign of news. Martin hovered near the operations board, restlessly updating route assignments for the day. Anna arrived soon after, greeting staff with soft smiles, but Melissa could see the strain in her eyes. She settled at her cubicle, refreshing her inbox repeatedly. Several messages flashed by, minor operational matters, a note from Kevin about software updates, but nothing from Danielle or her company. By mid-morning, Candace appeared at Melissa's desk, looking drained. "You heard anything?" she asked, fiddling with her phone. "Not yet." Melissa flexed her fingers, trying to ease the tension in her shoulders. "Should be soon, right?" Candace nodded, pressing her lips together. "Hopefully today. The waiting is killing me." Cheryl passed by with a stack of invoices, overhearing their conversation. "I've got an eerie feeling," she murmured. "It's too quiet. Usually, Danielle bombards us with questions." Melissa checked the time on her computer. It felt like the minutes were stretching into hours. Her gaze caught Jeremy stepping out of a conference room with Marcus. The two men seemed locked in a serious discussion, and as they parted, Jeremy looked toward Melissa with an unreadable expression. She stood, heart jumping, but he disappeared into Anna's office before she could approach. Rather than give in to her worry, Melissa forced herself to focus on daily tasks. She fielded some calls from smaller clients, confirming deliveries and troubleshooting minor issues at the micro-hubs. There was comfort in the routine, though it felt like treading water in a storm. Every so often, she glimpsed her phone, half expecting a message from Mr. Phillips telling her he'd already changed the locks. Close to noon, a whisper spread through the office. "Danielle just emailed." Melissa's pulse kicked. She opened her inbox to see a group message addressed to Anna, Martin, and a few others, including her. Subject: Preliminary decision. Urgent update. Message: I have presented the pilot results to my team. We'd like to discuss our findings with you in person this afternoon. Please be available at 2 p.m. for a video conference. This discussion will be critical to our final decision. Melissa's chest tightened. "This is it," she whispered, meeting the eyes of Candace and Cheryl, who had read the message over her shoulder. The next 2 hours crawled by, everyone on edge. Melissa struggled to keep her thoughts straight. She needed this contract to go through, not just for the company, but to justify the new position she'd fought so hard to earn. And maybe, just maybe, if the contract was secured, Jeremy could push for that emergency assistance. It was a lot to hope for, but hope was all she had. At exactly 2 p.m., she joined Anna, Martin, Jeremy, and Marcus in the largest conference room. They connected to the video call, and Danielle's image appeared on the screen, flanked by 2 senior executives from her organization. They greeted each other politely, but the tension in the room was palpable. Danielle began, her tone professional. "First, let me say your pilot program did demonstrate several strengths. The micro-hubs are innovative, and your recovery from the data crash was commendable. However, we have a few reservations to discuss." Melissa's stomach lurched at reservations. She glanced at Jeremy, who kept his face impassive. Marcus crossed his arms, a flash of irritation passing over his features. One of the executives, an older man with silver hair, chimed in. "We're concerned about scalability. Can Cooper Sustainable Deliveries handle rapid expansion if we roll this out nationwide in the future? Our board is split on whether to partner with a smaller firm over a bigger competitor." Martin leaned in, calmly explaining their incremental growth plans. Anna assured them the staff was up for the challenge. Danielle listened, occasionally scribbling notes. Meanwhile, Melissa tried to steady her breathing, sensing the precarious balance. The conversation stretched on, each side laying out benefits and potential pitfalls. By the end, Danielle cleared her throat. "We'll deliberate further based on what we've heard here. Expect our final official decision tomorrow morning." With that, the call ended. The screen went blank, leaving the conference room in a tense silence. Marcus exhaled sharply. Jeremy leaned back in his chair, and Anna rubbed her temples. There was no immediate celebration, just a collective feeling of suspended animation. Melissa's heart sank. Another day of waiting. Another night she'd spend questioning how much time she had left before her landlord made good on his threat. She rose slowly, stepping out of the conference room alongside her co-workers. No one needed to say it. Tomorrow's verdict would define their next move, and in Melissa's case, might well define her entire future. Later that evening, Melissa sat on the couch in her dim apartment, the hum of traffic outside an ever-present reminder of city life. Ivy was sound asleep after an evening of homework and a brief story time. Melissa couldn't focus on anything beyond the heaviness in her chest. The final decision from Danielle's firm would come in less than 12 hours, and Mr. Phillips's final ultimatum loomed just days away. Despite her exhaustion, she scrolled through apartment listings on her phone, hoping to find a rental she could afford if the eviction became inevitable. Every ad she saw was either too far, too expensive, or in terrible condition. After half an hour of fruitless searching, she set the phone aside, burying her face in her hands. A soft knock on the door startled her. She wasn't expecting Rebecca or anyone else at this hour. Heart pounding, she checked through the peephole. To her utter shock, Jeremy stood in the dimly lit hallway, hands in the pockets of his coat. She opened the door, blinking. "Jeremy, what are you doing here?" He looked genuinely apologetic. "I know it's late. I'm sorry for just dropping by unannounced. I wanted to talk." She hesitated before stepping aside. "Come in, I guess. But please keep your voice down. My daughter's asleep." Jeremy entered the cramped living room, scanning the peeling wallpaper and worn furniture. Melissa watched him, nerves jangling. She felt exposed, letting her boss, her potential benefactor, see the reality of her home. He turned to her with concern. "I'm sorry to intrude. I was thinking about your situation with the landlord. And I have something for you." He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his jacket, handing it to her. Her pulse thundered as she unfolded it, eyes roving over typed lines. It was an official-looking document from Cooper Sustainable Deliveries, referencing a short-term employee hardship loan. The amount was enough to cover her overdue rent, plus a small cushion. A wave of relief and disbelief washed over her, though it warred with her sense of pride. How did you manage this?" Marcus said no. Jeremy shrugged lightly. "Marcus is cautious, but Anna and I convinced him. We outlined the ways you've been indispensable to the pilot project. The company benefits from keeping you on stable footing. After all, losing a valuable employee right now would hurt us all." Melissa's throat felt tight. "I don't know what to say. It's everything I need. But what if I can't pay it back fast enough?" He gave a gentle smile. We arranged a reasonable repayment plan. Your new salary and potential bonus, if the contract goes through, should more than cover it. You'll have time. Tears pricked at her eyes. She was caught between gratitude and embarrassment. Thank you, but I don't want special treatment. This isn't charity, Melissa, Jeremy said softly. It's an investment in someone who's proven her worth 100 times over. I'm just sorry it took this crisis for us to offer real support. Her emotions overflowed. She set the paper on the small coffee table, turning away to blink back tears. I can finally breathe, she whispered, thinking of Ivy. They wouldn't have to pack up in the middle of the night. They wouldn't be searching for a shelter. The tension in her chest loosened just enough to let in a glimmer of hope. Jeremy stepped closer, a cautious kindness in his voice. If it's too personal to ask, is it just you and Ivy here? She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Yeah, it's been just us for a while now. She glanced around the modest space. I've tried my best, but it's not easy. He exhaled softly, as though witnessing her struggle up close affected him deeply. I understand more than you think, he said. I grew up in a tight situation too. My parents scraped by for years before things turned around. That's partly why I'm so determined to run a company that actually helps people, not just makes money. She paused, absorbing that, remembering her first encounter with him on the train, how he wore a nice suit, yet showed no judgment. It clicked that he had seen that eviction notice fall from her bag and chosen empathy over pity. I remember how kind you were that night, she murmured. I was half asleep, leaning on your shoulder, and you never once made me feel embarrassed. He chuckled quietly. You looked exhausted, and I knew what that felt like. I just never expected to end up hiring you, or, rather, that you'd apply to my company without realizing who I was. She managed a soft laugh through her tears. New York can be a small world sometimes. They stood there in a hush, the city's noise humming through the thin walls. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Inside, a fragile sense of hope bloomed. Melissa felt an impulse to reach out, but she held back, unsure if it was appropriate or even wise. Yet warmth flowed between them, an unspoken understanding that transcended roles of boss and employee. After a moment, Jeremy cleared his throat. I should let you rest. Big day tomorrow. She nodded, walking him to the door. Thank you again. This loan, it changes everything. He gave a faint nod in return, stepping into the dim hallway. Sleep well, and let's see what tomorrow brings. As the door clicked shut, Melissa pressed the folded document to her heart. Relief mixed with residual anxiety. One hurdle was nearly cleared. Now, all that remained was the verdict from Danielle's firm in the morning. It was one more night of restless anticipation, but this time, at least, she carried a spark of reassurance that for once, she and Ivy might remain securely under their own roof. Morning broke with a drizzling rain that pattered against the office windows, lending the day a muted gloom. Despite the weather, the atmosphere at Cooper Sustainable Deliveries felt electric. Phones buzzed, and hushed conversations circled around the same question. Would Danielle's firm sign a permanent contract, or would they walk away? Melissa entered the building with a lighter heart than usual. She still had miles to go in repaying the loan, but at least she had the funds to placate Mr. Phillips. Her phone showed a text from the landlord, curt, but confirming he'd await her payment by the end of the week. No immediate eviction, no abrupt uprooting for Ivy. It was a gift she hardly dared to hope for just days ago. The clock inched toward 9. Anna and Jeremy convened the core team in the conference room once more. Martin, Cheryl, Candice, Kevin, and Melissa. Everyone exchanged tense smiles, clearly bracing themselves. A video call link was open on the large screen, but blank at the moment. Seconds after 9, Danielle's face appeared, followed by the two executives from before. She nodded in greeting, cutting straight to the point. "Good morning, we've reviewed the pilot's final data and debated the results at length. Ultimately, our board has decided to move forward with Cooper Sustainable Deliveries for a long-term partnership." A collective gasp filled the room. Martin clapped a hand over his mouth in relief. Cheryl's eyes misted, and Candice let out a soft whoop. Jeremy bowed his head momentarily, as though in silent thanks, while Anna beamed at the screen. Melissa felt her pulse roar in her ears, a rush of adrenaline making her limbs tremble. Danielle continued, her tone more formal. "We believe in the potential of your micro-hub approach and your dedication to resolving issues quickly. Our executive team will issue a formal statement soon. Expect a multi-year contract, contingent on continued performance reviews." Marcus, who had been silent, allowed a rare smile to slip through. "We appreciate your confidence. We'll make sure you don't regret it." A few more minutes passed with details hashed out, start dates for the expanded service, official signing procedures, and a timeline for marketing announcements. By the time the call ended, the entire room felt buoyant. Anna bounced on her toes, hugging Candice. Martin pumped Kevin's hand in an enthusiastic shake. Melissa lingered, heart swamped with gratitude. This contract would mean financial stability for the company, potential raises, and the satisfaction of knowing her efforts had truly mattered. Looking at Jeremy, she found him already watching her, a smile curving at the corners of his mouth. She felt an odd flutter in her chest. Anna proposed a celebratory lunch-out, suggesting they invite the whole office if Marcus approved the tab. Marcus, unexpectedly, agreed with a gracious nod, clearly riding the high of success. People began to disperse, wanting to share the news with co-workers who were anxiously awaiting an update. Melissa slipped back to her cubicle, head spinning. She had a quick errand to handle before any celebration, contacting her landlord to finalize payment arrangements. She sent a brief message confirming she'd have the rent money in full by Friday. With that, a huge weight lifted off her shoulders. Next on her mental checklist was figuring out how to repay the loan to the company, yet at least now she had a timeline that wouldn't destroy her. She typed up some routine reports, her body still buzzing from the adrenaline. Before long, Jeremy approached her desk, leaning against the partition. "You okay?" he asked, warmth in his eyes. "More than okay," she answered, a shy smile forming. "I still can't believe it's real. We did it." He nodded. "We did, and I think it's fair to say you were a key player in making that happen. This micro-hub strategy was the backbone of our success." She shrugged bashfully. "I had help from everyone." "True," he said softly, "but you were the catalyst." Glancing around to ensure no one was eavesdropping, he added, "I was hoping we could talk later." "Away from the office." Her cheeks warmed. "Oh," he cleared his throat. "Not a meeting, really. I'd like to get to know the person behind all those brilliant ideas. Maybe over coffee or dinner." Her heart fluttered, a swirl of excitement and caution. "I'd like that," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "After everything settles down here?" He grinned, relief shining in his green eyes. "Sure. Let's see how the day goes." But soon, he moved on to consult with Martin, leaving Melissa breathless. She realized that her perspective on Jeremy had shifted dramatically. Once, he'd been just a weary stranger on the subway, then an intimidating boss, then a quiet savior with a generous loan. Now, he was becoming something else entirely, someone she might let into her personal life if she dared. It was a lot to process, especially with her responsibilities as a mother and her fresh start at financial security. Still, for the first time in years, she felt truly hopeful. No matter what complexities lay ahead, She had shown her strength in both the workplace and at home. The success of the pilot was proof of what she could accomplish. And perhaps, if she allowed it, there could be room for something more, something resembling genuine connection or even love. She exhaled slowly, savoring the bustling sounds of colleagues celebrating the good news. For once, the future glimmered with promise, and not just because she'd solved a crisis, but because she was finally open to receiving the support she'd always hesitated to accept. The official contract signing took place a few days later, followed by an impromptu party at a nearby restaurant. The entire staff of Cooper Sustainable Deliveries was invited, and while the gathering remained modest, the mood was decidedly jubilant. It wasn't every day a small startup secured such a high-profile partnership, especially one that started off so precariously. Melissa joined Candice and Cheryl at a corner table, each of them sipping from glasses of sparkling cider. Kevin toasted his success with the MicroHub software tweaks, and Anna praised the team's resilience in front of everyone. Martin, typically stoic, even cracked a few jokes, his posture noticeably relaxed for the first time since the pilot began. Amid the chatter, Jeremy circulated, shaking hands and offering personal thanks to each employee. When he approached Melissa's table, her pulse quickened, memories of their late-night conversation in her apartment returning in a rush. She tried to keep her demeanor casual, but her smile gave away her excitement. He leaned in, speaking softly, so only she could hear. "Still up for that coffee or dinner sometime?" She nodded, feeling a warmth spread across her cheeks. "Definitely. Let me know when." He returned her smile, then moved on to chat with Martin. Cheryl nudged Melissa under the table. "Something going on there," she teased quietly. Melissa busied herself with a sip of cider. He wants to talk outside the office, that's all." Cheryl winked. "If you say so." Candice giggled, exchanging a knowing look with Cheryl, but neither pressed further. As the evening wore on, employees started drifting out to catch trains or tend to their families. Melissa said her goodbyes, gathering her coat. Avi was waiting with Rebecca back home, and she wanted to share the happy news that the rent was paid and they had no reason to leave. At least, not unless they found someplace better on their own terms. Outside, a crisp breeze swept through the street, ruffling Melissa's hair. She spotted Jeremy standing near the curb, typing on his phone. Seeing her approach, he tucked the device away. "Need a ride home?" he offered. She glanced around. "I took the train here, so sure, if you don't mind." "I hate imposing." He waved off her concern. "Not at all. My car's just down the block." They strolled together, the din of city traffic and neon signs lighting their path. His vehicle turned out to be a sleek, eco-friendly hybrid parked near a row of bustling bars. He opened the passenger door for her, a quiet chivalry that made her smile. Once inside, they merged into the flow of city lights and late evening traffic. They spoke about the contract, the micro-hubs, and the everyday challenges of running a growing business. Eventually, though, the conversation shifted to more personal terrain. Jeremy asked gently about Ivy, what she liked to do for fun, how she was adapting to her new schedule with Melissa's job. "She's handling it well, considering," Melissa said, gazing out the window. "It's just been the two of us for so long. She's used to me working crazy hours, but at least now I have a stable income." Jeremy nodded. "I'd love to meet her someday, if you're comfortable with that." He hesitated, then added, "Not as your boss, but just as someone who admires the both of you." Melissa's heart fluttered at the suggestion. It felt surprisingly intimate, yet she didn't sense any pressure from him. "Maybe you can—" "One step at a time," she answered quietly, hoping he could hear the gratitude in her voice. They reached her building, which looked as worn and drab as ever. She turned to thank him for the ride, and found him watching her with a contemplative expression. "I'm really proud of you," he said softly, "not just for what you did at CSD, but how you've navigated everything, raising Ivy on your own, handling the eviction scare. You're incredibly strong." She exhaled, a swirl of emotions tightening her throat. "Some days I don't feel strong at all," she admitted. "But thank you for believing in me anyway." He offered a small smile. "We've all needed someone to believe in us at some point. I just want you to know you can lean on people if you have to. It doesn't make you weak." The words sank in deeper than she expected. She thought back to her first encounter with Jeremy on the subway, how she'd literally leaned on him in exhaustion, never imagining the impact it would have on her life. It was a testament to the strange, unpredictable ways kindness could connect two people. "Thank you," she repeated. Before she could overthink it, she leaned over the center console and placed a light kiss on his cheek. A spontaneous gesture of gratitude and budding affection. Surprise flickered in his eyes, followed by warmth. "I'll, see you at work," he murmured, momentarily disarmed. She smiled, stepping out of the car. "Yes, see you soon." She watched him drive off, the hum of the engine fading into the night. Climbing the worn stairs of her building, she found herself replaying his words. "You can lean on people if you have to. It doesn't make you weak." Maybe that was the final lesson in all of this. For so long, she had viewed dependency as failure, carrying burdens alone to prove her worth. But letting someone in, trusting them, could be an act of strength too. She entered her apartment, greeted by Ivy's art projects scattered on the coffee table. Her daughter had drawn a picture of the two of them standing in front of a tall building labeled CSD with crayon scrawls. Melissa's eyes prickled with tears of gratitude as she gently set it aside. She thought about the future, the stability her new salary provided, the possibility of moving to a safer neighborhood, the promise of a blossoming relationship that might offer both support and love. Ivy stirred from her bedroom, peeking out groggily. "Mommy, you're home." Melissa scooped her daughter into a soft embrace. "I am, sweetheart." She carried Ivy back to bed, tucking the blanket around her. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to Ivy's forehead. "Better than okay." And as she settled into the quiet of her own living room, she realized how much had changed in such a short time. The eviction threat had receded, her job was secure, and she felt a flicker of genuine hope for what might come next. For the first time in years, she truly believed that she and Ivy could have a future free from the constant shadows of worry and hardship. She gazed at the night sky through the window, thinking about all the roads that had led here, the long nights at the diner, the moment she'd fallen asleep on Jeremy's shoulder, the day she'd decided to risk everything on a new job. Each step, painful or thrilling, had guided her to this new beginning, and though no one's future was guaranteed, she was finally ready to face hers with open arms, knowing she didn't have to fight every battle on her own. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.